Before we start with the event, I have a small information to share. As we are in a middle of a pandemic, therefore in organizing this event, we made sure that we don't gather a huge audience in order to maintain and follow the SOPs. And yes, the event will be going live on YouTube. Thank you. Climate change. It is the greatest threat to our existence. It is the most urgent threat our entire species is facing, and we need to work collectively together to save Mother Earth. A very heartiest welcome to everyone. As the land of the rising sun, our beautiful state Arunachal Pradesh completes its 50 years of distinctive history, unparalleled unity and togetherness. I, Miss Prakriti Yoon, your anchor for today's event, I would like to welcome you all to the one-day seminar on climate change and sustainable future, the Arunachal Perspective. We are delighted to have with us the gracious presence of our chief guest for the event, Shri Chawna Menji, Honorable Deputy Chief Minister, Arunachal Pradesh. Our guest of honor, Shri Pasang Dorji Sonaji, Honorable Speaker, Arunachal Pradesh State Legislative Assembly. Please join me in welcoming our resource persons for the event. Shri Gumjum Haidarji, Honorable State Information Commissioner, Arunachal Pradesh State Information Commission, also the Chairman of the Team for United Arunachal, DUA. Shri Dhrupad Chaudharyji, former Chief Scaling Operations and International Subject Expert on Climate Change Adaptation and Mountain Livelihoods, Kathmandu. We also have with us our resource person, Dr. Partha Jyoti Das, environmental scientist and climate change expert, Aranyak from Guwahati, Assam. Shri Rituraj Phukan, founder, Indigenous Peoples Climate Justice Forum and National Coordinator. We have with us Shri Rajesh SG, Chief Conservator of Forest, Environment and Climate Change, Government of Arunachal Pradesh. Ms. Ajanta De, Joint Secretary and Program Director, Nature, Environment and Wildlife Society. We are delighted to have you with us. Thank you so much. Moving forward with the event, to felicitate our chief guest for the event, I would like to invite on stage Shri Gumjum Haidarji, Honorable State Information Commissioner, Arunachal Pradesh State Information Commission, and also the Chairman of Team for United Arunachal, DUA, to please come over stage and do the honor. Please, sir. I would like to request our chief guest for the event, Shri Chawna Menji, Honorable Deputy Chief Minister, Arunachal Pradesh, to receive a small token of love. Thank you, sir. Let's give a huge round of applause, audiences. May I also request our guest of honor for the event, Shri Pasang Dorji Sonaji, Honorable Speaker, Arunachal Pradesh State Legislative Assembly, to receive a small token of love. Thank you so much for being here with us, sir. You add to the glory of our program. Thank you so much. Thank you. Up next, I would like to request Shri Gumjum Haidar sir to please felicitate our resource person, Shri Rajesh SG, Chief Conservator of Forest, Environment and Climate Change, Government of Arunachal Pradesh. Please, sir. Let's give a huge round of applause, audiences. Thank you so much. Up next, I would like to request our committee members to please felicitate our resource person, Shri Gumjum Hadirji, Honorable State Information Commissioner, Arunachal Pradesh State Information Commission. Please, sir. Let's give a huge round of applause, everyone. Thank you so much. Up next, I would like to request Shri Rajesh SG, Chief Conservator of Forest, Environment and Climate Change, Government of Arunachal Pradesh, to please come forward and felicitate our resource persons for the event. May I please request Shri Dhrupad Chaudharyji, former Chief, Scaling Operations and International Subject Expert on Climate Change Adaptation and Mountain Livelihood, Kathmandu, to please come over stage and receive a token of love. Please, sir. Let's give a big hand, audience. Thank you, sir. Up next, I would like to invite on stage Dr. Partha Jyoti Das, environmental scientist and climate change expert, Aranyak from Guwahati, Assam, to please come over stage and receive the felicitation. Please, sir. Thank you, sir. I would also like to invite on stage Shri Rituraj Phukanji, founder, Indigenous Peoples Climate Justice Forum and National Coordinator. Please, sir. Thank you so much, sir. And the last but not the least, I would like to invite on stage Ms. Ajanta De, Joint Secretary and Program Director, Nature, Environment and Wildlife Society, to please come over stage and receive a token of love. Please, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am, for being here with us. We are delighted to have you. Thank you. Thank you, sir. So to begin the session with the welcome address, may I please invite on stage Shri Gumjum Hadirji, Honorable State Information Commissioner, Arunachal Pradesh State Information Commission, and also the chairman of the Dream for United Arunachal, DUA. Please, sir. Sir will share with us the objectives of the seminar. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My due respect goes to the Honorable Chief Guest of today's seminar on climate change, our Honorable Deputy Chief Minister, Sri Chauna Menji, the guest of honor of the seminar, Sri Pasang Dorji Sonaji, Honorable Speaker, State Legislative Assembly, Arunachal Pradesh. I would like to welcome each one of you to this seminar, especially to our resource persons who have travel all the way from various parts of India. Dr. Binay Singh ji, the professor of forestry, NERIST, Miss Ajanta De, who is from Kolkata, Joint Secretary and Program Director, News, Sri Rituras Pukonji, founder, Indigenous Peoples Climate Justice Forum, Sri Parto Jyoti Das, environmental scientist and climate expert, Arunachal Guwahati, Sri Drupad Chaudhary ji, international subject expert on climate change, adaptation, and mountain livelihoods, to Mr. Rajesh S., the respected CCF of Department of Forest, Arunachal Pradesh, all the legislators, honorable legislators, Sri Techi Kaso Saab, Sri Ninong Yering ji, Sri Dorji Wangdi ji, Madam Jumum Deori, Sri Kentorina ji, all the other delegates, the representative of CBOs of Arunachal Pradesh, we have especially invited you to disseminate the climate change and the carbon effects. The government of Arunachal Pradesh has made a declaration on Packet Declaration that targets to make Arunachal a carbon neutral or carbon negative by year 2047. Climate change and the global warming is discussed all over the world. The futuristic legislators and the leaders of Arunachal Pradesh has renamed Forest Department of Arunachal Pradesh to Environment, Forest and Climate Change. So the climate change and its effect is going to be very, very dangerous in future. Many leaders in various United Nations conference of COP, Conference of Parties, which was recently held in Glasgow, which was 26th of that kind, has asked the leaders all over to grow up and think about the climate change and work on it. The leaders all over the world in Glasgow, say especially the Prime Minister of Barbados, Miss Mia Mottley, she has said another 2 degrees of increase in temperature of our environment, our climate. All the island nations of the world will be submerged. Another 2%. And Mr. Boris Johnson said another 4%. Another 4% increase in our temperature. Most of the cities, be it Shanghai, London, New York, be it Mumbai, it is going to submerge. It is not going to livable for our future generation. So, leaders around the world, they have said it is the climate change and global warming is the single most greatest threat to humanity and to this earth. So, are we lagging behind? Are Arunachal lagging behind? If the world are aware and they are discussing this issue. So we also need to address the problems that we are facing. I am not an expert, I'm just a layman, I'm just an ordinary person. But since in future the world is not going to be world that we are living now, so therefore discussion on this regard is very, very much important and necessary. All of us who are sitting over here should start discussing. So therefore, in this 50 years of Arunachal Pradesh, 50 years of Arunachal Pradesh, the Arunachal should also start discussing. So this is just the beginning. We will continue this kind of seminar and conventions around Arunachal Pradesh. We'll try to listen to the experts, and whatever we will hear from them, we will try to disseminate the information that we gathered from them to the remote places, other places, and to all the panchayat leaders, all the student leaders, all youth organization, community-based organization. The orientation on this issue will be carried forward in future. Thank you very much for coming, and we will start with this note, and we hope that the gentlemen and the ladies who have gathered here will be amply benefited out of experts' deliverance. Thank you very much.
Sir has very rightly said that we need leaders who think about the climate and practice sustainable living. Thank you so much, sir. Coming up for the keynote address, may I please invite on stage Shri Dhrupad Chaudhary ji, former Chief, Scaling Operations and International Subject Expert on Climate Change Adaptation and Mountain Livelihoods from Kathmandu. Thank you, sir.
Changing the slides? Good morning, everyone. As we set up the PowerPoint, let me start by thanking the organizers for inviting me to this occasion to celebrate 50 years of the statehood, and also reiterate that it's a pleasure for me to come back here. I've worked in Arunachal earlier. 15 years ago, I was serving here in the GB Pant Institute. And after that, through ECMOD, the organization that I was involved in, I have been working on upland livelihoods, climate change, part of which we also had to look into issues which are happening here in Arunachal. In fact, ECMOD has a program right at this moment going on in Arunachal in the far east. It's called High Life. It's a regional program which involves India, Myanmar, and China, looking into how you can have sustainable livelihoods and also have the conservation of natural resources in here. So ECMOD continues to work in Arunachal, and I think that's the way that we'll have to go forward in having the regional cooperation and with a common goal. If I could start off with the slide, I have a short presentation. Now, when we talk about climate change, and particularly if we want to look at the Arunachal perspective, we have got to contextualize. As you appreciate, climate change knows no boundaries. It does not recognize political boundaries, and it affects all countries. Now, to look into what are the ways that we can adapt to climate change, we will have to understand what is happening globally and what is happening in the region. Now, I would start off looking at what happens in the Himalayas. Arunachal Pradesh is part of the greater Himalayas, of the whole Himalayan range, and what happens in the Himalayas affects or has implications for Arunachal as well. Can I have the next slide? Yeah. Now, climate change came to the fore. We became aware of climate change after the fourth IPCC assessment report was published in 2007. The report gave us an idea. It warned us that global temperatures were rising and we were looking at a world where we have a lot of risks coming out because of these rising temperatures. Not only were the temperatures rising, this was also causing the melting of ice of the polar regions and also the Himalayas. We have, since the fourth assessment report, come a long way. As Mr. Haider was talking about, we had the COP26 in Glasgow. But before that, a landmark event was the Paris Agreement, which was held a few years ago. And this was when the world came together and realized that if we don't take action, we are facing serious consequences which arise from climate change. And therefore, what is required is working together, putting on the table finances to ensure that action, climate action, starts off. By the time we came to Glasgow, it has been well accepted that climate change is a reality. It's no longer speculative. We know that it is happening. We know that there is need for urgent climate action, and we have just this decade in which to take action. If we don't, then we are talking about, as again Mr. Haider pointed out, not just increasing temperatures causing the islands to disappear, but we will not have enough of the ice in the Himalayas. And as I go along, I would explain or touch on that a little bit. Can we have the next slide, please? Now, why the Himalayas? The Hindu Kush Himalayas, which stretch from Afghanistan in the west all the way to Myanmar and China, is the largest freshwater reservoir outside the poles. This is the area where we have a huge reservoir of fresh water. And therefore, it is also known as the water tower of Asia or the third pole. Now, anything that happens on this area, on this region, will affect global, it will affect globally. And we also call this area as the pulse of the planet. Just like we call the Amazons the lungs of the planet. What happens here in the Himalayas reflects what is happening globally. Next slide, please. Now, as you see, the Himalayas give rise to 10 major rivers in Asia, which support nearly 2 billion people all over Asia. The Brahmaputra alone supports around 70 million people. And it means that what is happening in this region will affect, the next slide please, it will affect food security. For along these river basins, we have the food bowls of not just Asia, but of the world. If we have changes in temperature, if we have changes in water security, it is going to affect food production, which means we are looking at serious consequences for food and nutritional security. Also, these basins support an economy of an estimated 4.37 trillion US dollars. And that is a large sum. Now, anything which affects this economy means it's going to affect global economy, is going to cause a lot of serious challenges for poverty alleviation, for economic development of not just the local regions, but also nations. Next slide, please. ICIMOD in 2019 published what was known as the Hindu Kush Himalayan Assessment, a mini IPCC. And this is the first comprehensive assessment of the Hindu Kush Himalayan, outlining the critical importance of the region's distinct environment, people, and wildlife. So what are the main key messages that we get out of this assessment? The next slide. Can we have the next slide, please? No, go back. Now, we are talking about limiting global temperatures to 2 degrees. For the Himalayas, even 1.5 degrees temperature is too hot, because this temperature increase is amplified by the elevation difference. In other words, as you go up higher, the temperatures become much more warmer. Our estimates show that on an average, the increase in temperature across the Himalayas ranges from anything from 0.02 to around 0.04 or 0.05 degrees. And that's quite a lot. The next slide, please. Even if we calculate at a 1.5 degrees global temperature, we would lose about a third of the glacial ice and snow which is there. We are going to lose our water resources. At present rates or present way that the global economy and development is going on, we would lose 64% of the global ice which is there. Next slide. It means that snow-covered areas and snow volumes will decrease, and the snow line elevation will increase. In other words, your snow line will reduce and we have less area under snow. It also means that snow melt induced runoff peaks will be much more stronger and occur earlier in the year. Next slide. Now, it definitely means that we are not going to run out of water. We will have enough water. In fact, we'll have more water in the next coming half century. But what it means is that there will be a consistent increase in total runoff, particularly in the Ganges, the Indus, and the Brahmaputra basins. For the Ganges and Brahmaputra basin, the increased runoff is going to be not so much for ice melt, but is going to be the changing precipitation which is there. What does this imply? It means we are going to have more floods and droughts. So, extremes of temperatures which are going to be there. Next slide. There will be too much water and too little water. There is a strong seasonality. We will have more extreme events, longer dry periods, and increased intensity of precipitation, heavier rainfall. Floods and droughts will become more frequent, and this threatens food and nutritional security in the major Asian bread baskets. It also means that for a state or a place like Arunachal, where we are dependent on upland agriculture, and these are rain-fed agriculture, we are more vulnerable. Unless and until we take steps to ensure that our agriculture and our food production becomes more resilient and it becomes more or less risk averse. Next slide, please. Climate change means agriculture and food security is highly susceptible, and it is going to affect all dimensions of food security and nutrition. A report by the FAO, which came out in 2018, already shows that the number of undernourished has been increasing to 821 million in 2017. And we have to keep in mind that climate variability and extremes are key drivers for the rise in global hunger and one of the lead causes of severe food crisis. Now, when you look at the HKH region, what you find is 30% of the population suffers from food insecurity. Of this, 50% of the people face some form of malnutrition. And what does that ramify? It means we have to take care of nutritional security, and we have got to ensure that unless and until we do this, we are looking at a huge health challenge which is there of the present generation, but also of the future generation. And for those who are familiar with nutrition and the impacts, one knows that if you have malnutrition today, tomorrow's children or tomorrow's generation are going to be affected. In other words, what you're talking about is a serious threat on the quality of human resources that we have. Next slide, please. Climate change affects the smallholder. Like this lady that you see here who was harvesting her crops in the Apatani area. These are the people who are going to be affected unless we take action. Why? Because they are in the most vulnerable habitats and they're dependent on climate sensitive natural resources. However, one has to also keep in mind that smallholders are the main producers of food globally. 60 to 70% of food production in developing countries are by smallholders. Therefore, our focus on climate action, particularly in the agricultural sector, has got to focus on how we support and build resilience of the smallholder. Next slide. Now, climate change has got many different dimensions of its manifestation. And one that we see quite often, and Partha will be familiar with one of the slides here. This is in the site that we were working together. What you have is this huge post-flood sand casting, degrading agricultural lands. But in the uplands, you also have severe soil erosion post-heavy rainfall. And the reasons are more because of the way we manage or we are managing the natural resources which are there. It is not sustainable. We have to change the way that we do things. And one of the main challenges which are there, particularly in the eastern Himalayas, is how you manage shifting cultivation. Now that's a very important aspect because shifting cultivation is something which is very ill understood or misunderstood, and the approaches that we have had are actually exacerbating the negative effects which are there, bringing about what I term as second generation issues. Therefore, our whole approach towards management of shifting cultivation has to change, has got to be in a way that we do it in a manner which is naturally or nature positive, and it helps in ensuring that these negative effects are reduced. Next slide. Now, an important point to keep in mind when we are talking about agriculture in the uplands is that while in the plains, 70% of agriculture is irrigated, is just the opposite in the mountains. In the mountains, 65% of agriculture is rain-fed. And therefore, our approaches in terms of agriculture development can't be the same as you do in the plains. You have got to change and look at how you manage rain-fed agriculture, not irrigated agriculture. And if I may make a point here, if you look at the plans and the budget outlays over decades, in the mountains what we have tried to do is put in money for bringing in irrigation. And I think that's money very ill spent. Instead, what we require is to look into rain-fed agriculture and try and see how we can increase productivity under such conditions. And the reason is there's a very important link with climate change. As you saw in the first slides, with changing precipitation and changing availability of water, even if you invest for irrigation, there's not enough water left. Either the rainfall is going to be less or in extreme, or you don't have enough in the river flows. So our focus should be more on how you improve rain-fed agriculture rather than going in for the green revolution conventional agriculture where you're dependent on a lot of inputs, including on irrigation. And that's an important aspect that Arunachal can lead the way by looking at a different approach where you're focusing on rain-fed agriculture. Next slide, please. With climate change, ecosystems are also degrading. Now, when we look at the HKH region, 60% of the Himalayas are rangelands. And we have a small area of Arunachal where you have rangelands, particularly in the higher altitudes. We have got to look at these because these are also, with the increased temperature, these are also changing. Wetlands is important because these are the kidney of the landscape. If you don't look at wetland management, we are losing out the kidneys of this world. And that's not going to help in removing pollutants which are coming in helping to clean up water resources. And therefore, we have to have a focus on natural ecosystems and how we manage that. And Arunachal is one of the richest biodiverse areas. And I think we have to lay a lot of emphasis on wise management of these resources. Next slide, please. Now, with the changes in climate, 1 billion people across the Himalayas are at risk from natural hazards. Floods, landslides, avalanches, droughts, and earthquakes are going to increase. Arunachal is no exception. We have got to ensure that we are building up approaches which reduce the risks. Now, when you talk about this risk, you're looking at not just physical damage to different places and the loss of soil or forests. You're talking about very high risk to infrastructure. In a state like Arunachal, roads and connectivity is very, very important. And if we don't have roads and infrastructure which are resistant or resilient to climate change, we are talking about serious communication issues. Arunachal is looked at as a powerhouse of power generation. We have enough hydrological or hydro resources in here. We have got to look at these now with another lens. Have we looked into the risk which are going to arise because of climate change, because of the changes in the water flow, in the river flow? We had a recent example last year in Uttarakhand, where a sudden flash flood destroyed many of the hydroelectric power projects which were there. And we are looking at similar challenges, we are looking at similar risks in other parts of the HKH as well. Therefore, when we talk about power generation in Arunachal, I am very, very happy to see in the Pake declaration that the government has or intends to look at renewable energy. And I think there are a lot of potential in Arunachal to move towards that. It's not just solar energy that you're talking about. You have hydroelectric, but you can look at run of the river approaches which are there, not big dams. You can look at the biomass. Arunachal has the temperature and the precipitation is such that you can have biogasifiers and similar approaches which are there. Wind energy. I think we have got to look at this, and as the government of India has also declared, the move towards non-conventional renewable energy is something that we have to put center stage. But above all, can we have the next slide? We need to look at regional cooperation. And the regional cooperation has to be for sustainable bring together 8 ministers from 8 countries who have, made a pledge, conviction in regard to take this action forward, the climate action forward. And I think from India, we have got to ensure that we are taking these steps, particularly when you talk about the hill states where energy security, we are energy surplus if you put in the right investments, but we have got to make it energy secure as well and risk managed from the view of climate change. Next slide, please. Good water governance is another action that we have got to ensure. And when I talk about good governance in the context of Arunachal or any of these states, is not just river water sharing or water management that I'm talking about. Because you have most of the villages and habitations way up in the mountains, and access to water becomes difficult. Therefore, what becomes very important in these states is looking at spring shed management. And spring shed management then get linked up with watershed management and natural resource management, particularly the forests, ecosystem services which come out of that. So that's another area. And again, I see this reflected in the Pake Declaration. It's necessary to have the finer details of how we can go about doing this. The next slide, please. Policies and responses in the countries, unfortunately, do not reflect or do not pay enough attention to the gender aspect. And this is a gap that we have got to address if we want to ensure that people, and particularly the marginalized, the people who are up in the mountains and these areas, their resilience is built up to adapt to the climate change, to overcome the challenges which are there. And I think this is one area across the board, across the sectors, that we have got to ensure that gender aspects are not lost out and we pay enough attention while we are making the plans. Next slide, please. So when we look overall on what is required, adaptation to climate change and steps to adapt becomes very, very important. This takes center stage. And we have got to ensure that while mitigation measures are there, whether you talk about afforestation, increasing the forest cover, or you're looking at cleaner energy or looking at cleaner industries, people on the ground who are facing challenges from the climate change need to adapt, and we have got to support them to adapt that. Risk management, insurance, and these are aspects that we have got to look into. My last slide is, can we go to the next slide? These are just a few points that I think in the Arunachal context becomes very, very important. One, when we look at climate action, when we need to operationalize the state climate action plan, the focus on mountain agriculture, particularly rain-fed agriculture, needs to be center stage. We need to look at nature-positive approaches. Now, the recent UN Food Systems Summit has looked at ways in which we can improve our approaches for food production, how we can ensure food security, and also have climate change, which is synergistic to climate change. And a recommendation which comes out is the promotion of nature-positive approaches. Now, these draws a lot from the indigenous food systems, and I think from my experience, Arunachal has at least 3 systems. The Apatani system is well known in terms of resource management and the high efficiency in terms of food production and nature management. When we go westwards, when you go into Tawang, the way that agriculture is done there. And last but not the least, which is most maligned, a lot of practices in shifting cultivation are very important, and there's a lot to learn from that. I will be having another presentation in the next panel, which is on shifting cultivation. But for the benefit of our honorable guests, let me just make one point. When we talk about shifting cultivation, it is usually perceived as something which is primitive, it is perceived as something which is environmentally destructive and which needs to be replaced. If you look at the way that traditional resource management is done in shifting cultivation, you will see that it is not just an agricultural practice. Shifting cultivation depends on the management of fallow forests. If you don't have fallow forests, you will not have shifting cultivation. And for the shifting cultivator, forest management is center stage to shifting cultivation. Therefore, before we right away shifting cultivation and say that it's only destructive, we need to understand that and build on the strengths which shifting cultivation has, right? So, risk insurance, resilience building is another action point that I would suggest. We need to promote locally available products and skills. Arunachal is rich in this. There's traditional knowledge. There's a lot of natural dyes which were used. And today, this is what the world is going. There's a high demand for natural dyes rather than synthetic. And this is an area where I think you have enough resources to build this up. We need to promote, as I said earlier, risk-resilient infrastructure, shift to renewable energy, and ensure water security. These are a few points that I think would be important when Arunachal goes forward for sustainable development and for ensuring climate exchange. Thank you very much. I would take this opportunity also. We came up last year with a few publications, sir. And this is on how you can transit shifting cultivation to resilient farming systems. And there are two policy briefs as well in regard to forest management and also on food availability, food security. And I'd like to be happy to hand this over to the Honorable. Yes, please. I hope this will, the last chapter gives you a framework in terms of how to manage shifting cultivation, how you can have the transformations. And I hope these are helpful for the state to build up or to make your plans, your strategy in terms of how you take things forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shri Dhrupad Chaudhary ji, for enlightening us about the climate impacts in the Hindu Kush Himalaya, transboundary risk, and the need for urgent action in Arunachal. Thank you so much. Up next, I would like to request our guest of honor, Shri Pasang Dorji Sona ji, Honorable Speaker, Arunachal Pradesh Legislative Assembly, for his speech. Sir will speak on the political will and government's position to address the challenges of climate change in Arunachal. Please, sir.
It's too loud, I think. Good morning. I acknowledge Honorable Deputy Chief Minister in absence at the moment as the chief guest today. And on the dais, Sri Rajesh, CCF, and Information Commissioner Sri Gumjum Haider, honorable members of Legislative Assembly, and learned resource person who had come to participate in this panel discussion and symposium on climate change, and all other respected guests, ladies and gentlemen, and media friends. I've been asked to speak on political will and government's position to address the challenge. But today we have, as a chief guest, the Deputy Chief Minister from the government side. I think he'll be the right person, to speak on the government's position and how they have planned to mitigate this climate change in the state of Arunachal. Nevertheless, I'll be delivering with a layman's perspective about the climate change, how we see it and how we perceive, and what we need to understand about the coming danger which we're going to face due to the climate change. So when I said as a layman, earlier we used to think, when we talk about climate change or the global warming, we used to think, oh, this is the responsibility of the developed nation because they have done enough damage to the world. So it's their responsibility, And we as a developing nation, we don't have any responsibility towards the mitigation of climate change. We have seen the Cancun summit, the Paris Agreement, now the COP26, which was recently held in Glasgow, where more than 200 countries attended, and they have given their commitment, to mitigate the climate change issue. Now the resource person has given us a PowerPoint presentation. I was looking at it and it was really horrifying, to see what could happen to the globe, to this blue planet, if we don't act now. It's an exigency at the moment what we see, because we try to understand and connect ourselves with which is happening around us. So just a recent example, I come from a place, very close to the Himalaya, called Mechuka. So way back when I was back in Mechuka during the month of November, this November, it was so warm because earlier years we used to get a lot of snows in the mountain around. We did not even see a small patch of snow on the mountain. And the climate, the weather was so warm. They were thinking, this could be the impact of the climate change. And if you see that recently, we have never seen such a heavy snowfall, as close as Darya Hill, which is right here near Itanagar, and even Zero, for that matter, even a lot of places which have never seen snowfall, they got snowfall. So this is that very the behavior of the climate, that indicates that really something is happening and we must work on it. So when we say that, I keep telling people about what His Holiness has said about climate change and our responsibility towards mitigating this issue. He said that if you look at the moon, it looks so beautiful in the night, and it has been inspiration for lots of writers and the poets to write and describe its beauty. Even they compared moon with beautiful objects. It inspired so many poets, so many writers, because it looks so beautiful in the night. But even if you try, even if you want, you cannot go and settle there. He said, this blue planet, the Earth, is the only hope. Our billionaires are going to space, spending hundreds and thousands of crores of money. But are we actually getting, to see the light of, having a habitation in that outer space? All we need to do is focus on our planet where we are living. So that's what it always rings my mind whenever the climate change comes. His Holiness said, we need to come together, fight this menace of climate change, because it will be too late if we don't act now. So the climate change, the greenhouse gas emissions, we have read, we know what it is, but we never thought that it could be so detrimental, it could be so horrendous, for our people. And it just not only affect one aspect of our human life. Now, like what we have said in the PowerPoint presentation, right from your health, right from your food security, right from the depletion in the water sources, and like you said, the Himalaya is the third pole, what they say. So we need to protect it. And like I said, when we thought like it was just a responsibility of the developed country, now we understand that we all need to collectively get together and fight this menace, or else we are too late and we're going to face the music very soon. So this is one of the biggest challenge we have. And when we talk about the government's will, the political will, and what the government is doing to address this problem. So I have seen in the agenda, there's a presentation on Paquet Declaration. I think this Paquet Declaration 2047 is the commitment of the government, to fight climate change. And there it says climate change resilient, because as a growing state, we need to do a lot of developmental activities. But at the same time, how we take care of the environment, that is the biggest challenge. And in all this while, when we frame policies also, we always say that when we frame a policy, development is a must, but at the same time, we have to see that we are not, playing around with our fragile ecology, because we need to, think about our future, think about the, environment, how it's going to affect us. And we keep, shouting our lungs out, saying we have more than 83% of forest cover in Arunachal. We are the lung of India. And when Supreme Court has put a ban on the timber operation, we were like very agitated. I said, for the ill work, done by rest of the country, why Arunachal is facing, why is Arunachal is getting all the brunt, and because of us, we are giving so much of oxygen to the whole country, because we have more than 80% of forest cover. But now we realize that, we all need to come together, because one community or one region or just a country alone cannot do anything. It is a collective effort where we all need to come together and fight this fight this climate change problem and the mitigation. Because in Arunachal also, we are doing a lot of infrastructure development. So on this aspect, the government is very, very careful about it, and government also wants that we need to grow, but we need to grow with a very compassionate approach towards the environment, so that our future doesn't get affected. That sustainable development has to be there. So today, Honorable Deputy Chief Minister is here with us. I think he will give us a deliberation on what are the government's plan and what are they doing. But in a nutshell, I said the Paquet Declaration shows the government's commitment on climate change. And I think, if I'm not wrong, Arunachal is the only state who has taken such a step as a state on climate change with this Paquet Declaration. And the commitment towards the environment. And our forest minister, he has given a clarion call for surrendering the air guns. I think that also will contribute lots to the protection of our wildlife and flora and fauna, because we all are connected with each other. Because right from the flora and fauna to the human being, it's a total ecosystem. So we need to be very, very concerned, and we have to think about the fragile ecosystem, how to protect it. So since I'm not an expert on all this subject, we have lots of resource persons who have come, and we have a deliberation on the Paquet Declaration also. I think, and the Deputy Chief Minister will speak on behalf of the government, and the government's approach towards the challenges and the solution, to this present and clear danger of climate change. So with these few words, I would like to thank the organizing committee for putting up such a beautiful symposium today on climate change, because we all need to understand the problem which is really, really horrifying, in coming for sustainable development and for the future of our people and the entire planet as a whole. With this, I would like to thank once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sri Pasang Dorji Sonaji, for sharing such kind words with us. And Sir very correctly said that we need to take action now to protect the environment, for our Mother Earth is our only hope. Moving ahead, for the opening remarks, may I please invite on stage Dr. Partha Jyoti Das, environmental scientist and climate change expert, Aranyak from Guwahati, Assam. Sir will share his words on climate change and Northeast India, implications for risk and resilience. Please, sir.
Please project my presentation on the screen. Respected Deputy Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh, respected Speaker, Arunachal Lok Sabha Assembly, respected Information Commissioner, and respected CCF, Forest Department, Forest and Environment Department, friends from media, ladies and gentlemen. As a designated task, as an assigned task, I chose to speak in a little bit generic way, focusing on not the northeastern region as a whole, but in between also referring as far as possible specifically to Arunachal Pradesh when I speak mostly about the risks, and also discuss with you about how to pave a future path for resilience based on very localized experiences. Thanks to Dr. Dhrupa Chaudhary and Honorable Speaker, sir, you have built a very solid ground for me to directly jump into business actually. So, as the title reflects, can I have the next slide? So, the world is warming, the Indian subcontinent is warming, the northeastern region is warming. We all know that we are warming, but the first thing when we talk about a sustainable future, and when we want to have a discourse on climate change, the first thing I would insist, what we need is a robust knowledge base, is very, very scientifically reliable information we must have, based on which plans can be formulated. So therefore, I just wanted to give you some very recent information about what we have come to know from the scientific community about what is happening in Northeast India and especially in Arunachal Pradesh. If you have a look at that, no, the other one, the previous, yes. I mean, just look at the northeastern part and just remember that the more brown and the more red and reddish yellow the colors are, that means more warming throughout the year in all the 4 seasons. So these are very, very recent results coming from the Indian scientists based on instrumental data, which is, I think, why it's more reliable actually. And if you see a little bit minutely, you will see Arunachal Pradesh and its surrounding area. Of course, the whole region as a whole is warming fast. And the presentations will be there. If you want to have a better look at it later on, you always can. Next slide, please. The other these are, so what are the most important indicators of climate change? One is warming. So at local level, at regional level, we have enough evidence, Northeast, Arunachal, everywhere it's warming. Another important indicator is increase in hot summer days and hot summer nights, which is globally observed. This is what we have for Northeast India from Indian scientific literature. Hot days and hot nights are, number of hot days and hot nights are increasing. Next slide, please. Honorable Speaker sir was talking about, Mechuka becoming warmer. Not only Mechuka, everywhere. And this is something we can directly correlate to our, experience in last maybe 1 decade. Although our weather memory is very weak in case of public, I have given a list of important years from the perspective of Guwahati, taking Guwahati, how Guwahati is warming up actually in last 1.5 decade. So in most cases you can see, from 2005 onwards to 2020, each year Guwahati is attaining a kind of new hot summer record. And last time it was about more than 40 degrees centigrade. And now 2020, the data I'm still having a look at, I have information that in last year, 2021, there were many areas in Northeast India, including places in Mizoram, Manipur, Arunachal Pradesh, that have actually broken all previous records of summertime. Not exactly summertime, June, July, August, September, up to September. Even October was very, very warm. So these are, undeniable evidences that things are happening in our own courtyard, in our own home. And globally, only a few days back, NOAA and NASA have released their results, identifying that the year that we have just passed, 2021, was the 6th warmest year in human history. And the last 9 years, from 2013 to 2021, are actually the 9 warmest year in human history, from 1880 to 2021. So this is the severity of the situation. And, we are also receiving a lot of other reports. Unfortunately, most of these reports usually are not collated or they are not available in a certain place. But one is to give a special effort to collect this kind of information of, number one, rising temperature for a day or two. Number two, below normal rainfall in specific areas. Next slide, please. This is interesting. Another very important indicator of, if somebody asks you what is climate change, what is the indication, what is the proof that climate is changing or this or that, the second most, after temperature, the second most important parameter is rainfall. So do we know enough about what is happening to the rainfall regime of Northeast India? It's not easy to describe the situation. Is a little bit complex in one slide. But if you have a look at these 4 diagrams, you will see, without me explaining, that the last leg of all these trends are actually decreasing. That means there is a consensus now that on the long-term normal rainfall in Northeast India, especially in the long-term normal as well as especially long-term summer monsoon rainfall, is having a decreasing trend. Our monsoon rainfall is actually decreasing. Although perceptually, socially, we may have other kind of experiences. If there is a big flood and all that, there's a lot of rainfall for 2-3 days, people may have kind of an idea that, there's a lot of rainfall, probably because of climate change. But that scientifically, if we look at it, that is not the case actually. So, but as I said, then rainfall, the actual description of rainfall is in Northeast India is that rainfall has really become erratic. Erratic means it has lots lost its pattern that used to be with it about 30 years back. And therefore, the predictability has become less, the uncertainty has increased. Now, in my second slide, if you could go to the second slide, next slide. Also, I'll explain it. You know, mostly what is happening ki, the number of rainy days, the total amount of rainfall in many cases have not significantly increased, has not significantly decreased, but the number of rainy days is decreasing. That means it rains heavily in a single episode. Whenever it rains heavily. Whenever it doesn't rain for a long time. This kind of a binary situation is being seen in the rainfall pattern of Northeast India, which is also true for everywhere, but in general for Northeast India. I'm sure you have experienced this in Arunachal Pradesh also. Right? Now, in this picture, you have seen the rainfall pattern shown as meteorological subdivisions. And Arunachal itself is one meteorological subdivision, which is very important in Northeast India. Then Assam and Meghalaya jointly is another meteorological subdivision, and the rest of our four states, MMM, Mizoram, Manipur, Tripura, they constitute another rainfall subdivision, and then Sikkim and part of West Bengal constitute the fourth meteorological. Now, if you have a look at it, and if you then compare it with the color of the legend, you will see that Arunachal Pradesh is actually showing a decreasing trend in both general annual rainfall as well as monsoon rainfall. And if you come to the 1 to 3rd diagram, you will see where you have seen some of the most important districts, district-wise distribution of rainfall. You will see many of these districts painted in dark brown lie within Northeast India, also in Arunachal Pradesh. And these are all undergoing deficit rainfall. So these are scientific evidences coming, and this has to be taken, I think, seriously. Next. So this is what I was referring to actually. The rainy days are decreasing. Either the rainfall or increasing or remaining almost statistically stationary. So resulting in a binary kind of pattern of rainfall. Then, next slide. So that part is now over. So I will now try to draw your attention to some very important and recent issues which have a lot to do with climate change, which usually earlier were not thought of as a consequence, as a big consequence, or as a highly related to climate change. But this is what is worrying our disaster managers all over India and mostly in Northeast India. Thunderstorms, lightning, and hailstorms. You have seen what is happening to entire Northeast India in terms of hailstorm. Shillong is having so many episodes of hailstorm. Assam, 2 weeks back only, And then lightning. It has been recently recognized by, the National Disaster Management Authority as one of the, cognizant disasters to be looked at. So now only, very recently, the district disaster management authorities, the state disaster management authorities have started collecting information about this. But this has become a killer disaster. This keeps on happening all over Northeast India, especially in the foothills. But we never took it seriously for the first time, because this is also heavily influenced by climate change. So it's very important that we, try to investigate wherever we get information about major lightning disasters leading to killing of people, and on an average 2,000 people are dying each year. More than 2,000 people are dying each year in India just because of lightning. And Northeast India has been defined as extremely prone to lightning disasters, which is also related to climatic fluctuations. Next slide, please. So similarly, you must have heard, I don't know, you may not have heard that last year only, there was a very big, very severe incidence of lightning strike. And more than 8 elephants died in Nagaon district. This was an international news because this has happened for the first time. Elephants are very big animals, and people couldn't even imagine that lightnings can be so disastrous. Just think about what would have happened to a group of people, human beings, in place of. So then onwards, people at least in Northeast India have started taking it even more seriously. So what is happening? Why are we having so many and so lethal doses of lightning strikes? Next slide, please. So this is just to also give a reference to what earlier speaker said. We must remember that in Northeast India, all our development efforts, all our development programs, whenever we devise them for anything, we must not forget that we are a land of rivers. We are surrounded by lands of rivers. So many of our rivers are interstate in nature or transboundary. They come from Bhutan, majorly, or China, and then most of the rivers that flow into Assam flow through Arunachal Pradesh, or they originate in Arunachal Pradesh, or in Meghalaya, or in Manipur, or Nagaland. This is the nature of the entire Brahmaputra Barak Valley and its surrounding upland. And therefore, whatever happens because of climate change to these river regimes in terms of river hydrology, geomorphology, land use, land cover change has a very serious bearing, and the risk increases as the river flows from upstream to downstream, as you descend from the upland to the midland to the downstream. Next slide. Some live examples of how those are happening outside our territory are also affecting, because of climate change, lives and livelihood in Northeast India. The potentially dangerous glacial lakes that are being formed under formation in different stages in Bhutan, partly in Tibet, have given rise to catastrophic flash floods, which also had affected flood situation in Assam previously. And then the formation of naturally induced dams in the Himalayan region. Examples, there are many examples from Arunachal, from Bhutan, from Tibet. These incidences are increasing in frequency and intensity, which are directly correlated to climate change. Next slide, please. Next slide. So, in a nutshell, rainfall has become erratic, less predictable. We have more incidences of cloudburst and heavy rainfall, and leading to mostly a lot of flash floods. A lot of flash floods, and here I am, trying to make a difference between normal riverine floods and flash floods. And we all know that normal riverine floods is a little bit easier to monitor, to monitor and to manage, but flash floods are very difficult to predict or monitor or manage. And now, more and more reports are coming from all over Northeast India about more and more incidences of flash floods, which is also very plausibly related to consequences of climate change. Next. Some images from some very well-known flash floods, which were results of big cloudburst events, either in Arunachal Pradesh or in Meghalaya, but mainly affecting Assam. Next. So not only in Assam, these are pictures from Assam, but not only in Assam, also in Arunachal Pradesh, Manipur and all that, river bank erosion is a very serious hydroclimatic disaster, which is also bearing the brunt of climate change, because this as a process, this is heavily influenced by changes in the sediment yield and ditches of flow or velocity. Next slide. Okay, there was some text also, but anyway, what I want to tell you is that people outside the Northeast region think that, which is partly also true also, that Northeast has a lot of rainfall. You have Pasighat, more than 4,000 millimeter. You have Cherrapunji, Mawsynram, you have Lakhimpur, you have many other places. A lot of rainfall, yes, but that doesn't mean that we have enough rain, enough soil moisture, enough water throughout the year. No, the abundance is seasonal in nature. What about the dry periods? Now we have reports that more and more areas in Northeast India are coming into the grip of drought-like situations because of extremely below rainfall patterns. Now, this is again a complex pattern. There are many situations we have observed in last 10, 20 years. On one hand, you will see part of Assam will be reeling under flood. At the same time, the eastern Assam is reeling under flood, western Assam is crying for rainfall, not having enough rain to enable the farmers to sow the seeds of salipedi. Similar experiences from Manipur, from Mizoram, from parts of Arunachal Pradesh. So this disparity, this erraticity is increasing, and unfortunately this is very difficult. This is becoming difficult to predict actually. So most of the climate models have failed to predict these nuances which can be observed from ground only. And that's why it's very important to collect climatological data and information from ground using kind of our instrumental infrastructure. Next slide. Next. Various questions arise about the Brahmaputra, what will happen to the Fortunately, some good amount of research is being done around the Brahmaputra. There are different kind of results and all that, but I like to project in most of my this picture, in most of my presentations, but this gives you a vivid result of what is going to happen. So qualitatively speaking, after 1950, there's a consensus among climatologists who are working on Brahmaputra, is that after 2050, there's going to be a drastic reduction in the flow of Brahmaputra river and many of its tributaries. So this, and for basin also, for the entire basin also, there are predictions like that. Now this has a lot of implications. And this is a very important piece of information for every state, especially for Arunachal Pradesh, because this has the headwaters of the Siang. Not only Siang, many of its important tributaries, the Dibang and the Lohit, right? Next. So as I said, what climate change means in terms of this, this is a very important case, which I'm sure many of you in Arunachal Pradesh must be remembering what happened in the month of June in 2000. What happened to the river Siang? The most catastrophic flood on record till now happened in June 2000. Because of what? Because of bursting of a landslide lake that was formed where? In Tibet. How far? About 200 kilometers up. But even then, the result was so disastrous in East Siang district and the Jonai subdivision of Dhemaji district. Many people died. I think many of you remember. And a lot of these experiences have been also written about it, right? So these are examples of how catastrophic flash floods can be unleashed because of climate change, while the origin of this phenomena is outside our country, but affects us very dearly. So therefore, it's not enough to have kind of our preparedness in our country, but regional cooperation, actions of hydrological information, those are very much part of climate change preparedness. Next. Now, probably I'm coming towards the end of my presentation. I'm drawing your attention to the observations of the Forest Survey of India. The results were published very recently only, last month. If you have a look at it, what the Forest Survey of India is saying, that while on an average during 2019 to 21, India as a whole has gained some forest, nominally. The gain is nominal, but it has gained. But Northeast India as a whole has lost a substantial amount of its forest cover, which is about 1020 square kilometer. Out of which, the largest loss has been suffered by Arunachal Pradesh, Mizoram, Nagaland, and Meghalaya. These are very important information for us when we talk about climate change mitigation and adaptation, because I don't have to explain why forests are important as carbon sequestrators, as provider of myriads of ecosystem services that enable our indigenous people to survive, exist, flourish, and sustain. But we are losing forest first. On an average, I just had a quick look at what is happening in the forest status of Northeast India over last more than 1 decade, as per Forest Survey figures, and I saw that for more than a decade now, Northeast India as a whole is losing forest cover at a rate of 300 square kilometer per year. And that's huge actually. But then again, we need to investigate what type of forest we have lost actually. Is it primary forest? Is it forest from our most precious biodiversity hotspots? Then we have to be worried even more. We have reasons to be worried more even, right? So this is something that we have to keep in mind when you think about adaptation plans, and it is a must that we must compensate for what we have lost in last 1 decade or 2 decades. There are so many ways to do that actually. We must regain our forest cover and primary forest cover wherever. Because forest, we all know that it's not only, if you go to government reports, you will see that mostly it is the first factor mentioned is shifting cultivation. I don't agree. Rupata doesn't agree. Many of us don't agree. There are many other reasons. Shifting cultivation is not the culprit. There are many other reasons actually. But we need to investigate. We need to actually find out which factor is contributing how much of deforestation. And then we'll be in a position to do something about it actually. And there are a lot of development activities, a lot of constructions in many places at the same time. And those small contributions actually result in a big cumulative amount of forest loss. And once you lose those forests, and in the name of compensatory afforestation, if you plant forest somewhere else outside Arunachal, it doesn't help actually Arunachal. And you only generate secondary deciduous forest, not the this kind of primary semi-evergreen or evergreen forest, which is much more valuable than other types. Next slide. And this probably is, I would say that last important issue I want to, I want you to attend. So this is about forest fire. This is about forest fire. We all know that the entire world is suffering from very severe episodes of forest fire. Think about, you must be remembering what happened in Australia in 2021. A large patch of forest in USA even 2021, late 2021, November. Entire world is witnessing very heavy episodes of forest fire. What about Northeast India? What about Northeast India? Do we have this problem? Many of us do not know about it, but this is fast becoming a very, very severe problem for Northeast India. There are many examples, many records of forest fire incidents happening in all our 8 states, northeastern states. Although their number is not that great, but they are recorded. Forest fires have been happening regularly. In many cases, it could be directly correlated to the warming atmosphere. But in some cases, some forest fires were found to be induced by shifting cultivation also. So it has several dimensions actually. But whatever the origin, this is becoming very serious. And the most recent Forest Survey of India has started monitoring forest fires for last 5-6 years, I think. This is the latest result. If you can see again, Northeast India, they have said that Northeast India is increasing the most fire-prone area. First, Northeast India is becoming the most important fire-prone area. You see what they say. The states under the Northeast region showed the highest tendency of forest fire, and these states fall under extremely to very highly forest fire zone. States like Mizoram, Tripura, Meghalaya, and Manipur in northern part of India exhibit the highest forest fire probability in terms of its frequency and even occurrence. This is something also which is probably not accounted for usually in our forest management plan or in our future kind of climate mitigation or climate adaptation plan, but we no longer can ignore this incident. Next slide. Well, you can see Honorable Chief Minister of Arunachal in a very brooding mood having a look at a river. You know which river it is? And I hope you remember those, because we are researchers, we were very keen observers actually of what was happening to the Brahmaputra from across the Mahunderi. And this came out as one of the most important incidents in our recent memory, something happening to the water of the Siang and then partly Brahmaputra up to Dhubri. It was very difficult initially to explain. There was no answer, neither from Government of India nor for anywhere actually. But later it was found that there was a big landslide because of a big earthquake. And there are many other hypotheses, but this is the most scientific one. That there was a big earthquake, there was a big landslide upstream in Tibet, and for a few weeks, entire water course of Brahmaputra, Siang and Brahmaputra became unutilizable. Things like this are happening. Extremely heavy rainfall causing a lot of more landslides in the Himalayan area, which is fragile, very fragile we know, giving to this kind of water quality problems in future will become common. Next. So to summarize, in Northeast India, climate change is affecting all aspects of nature, environment, all development sectors, all aspects of our life and livelihoods. Next. These photographs are very, very symbolic. All these aspects, whatever you understand by having a look at these pictures, every sector is being affected. From navigation to natural resource management, to drinking water security, right? To forest availability, right? Next. I cannot conclude this presentation without referring to what was already mentioned by Dr. Chaudhuri, that in spite of the fact that we have a lot of hydroelectric potential, in spite of the fact that it needs to be, to a certain extent, there's no denial that it needs to be tapped, we must be very, 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 very cautious in planning our water resources projects, especially hydroelectric projects, because the entire world is now revisiting the big hydroelectric projects in Europe, in America, and especially in Himalaya. There's a lot of research going on also. People asking the question is that if we make a big dam, investing, say, 50,000 crores of rupees or something like that, what is the guarantee that in next 15 to 20 years there will be enough water inflow to the project to enable us to keep producing electricity? Number one. In most cases, it is difficult to make a proper scientific assessment of flow sustainability for a scenario of 30 to 50 years because we don't have enough data in those places where you were making the dam. So whatever model you build, whatever statistical analysis you do is actually not robust. So this is the time to think more and more deeply, more carefully about how to probably make safer dams. Big dams are definitely, have a lot of problems. We all know that. Smaller ones, it's not, again, it's not an easy issue to be, resolved like that, but we all understand the intricacies of this issue. But there's no denial that climate change is having a lot of effect on glacier melt, winter flow, lean season flow, summer season flow everywhere in the world, and in many places, many of these hydroelectric projects are undergoing revision in designing wherever is possible. But in case of very, very big dams, it's not possible. So that kind of risk and uncertainty now accompanies this sector. The other aspect is again the fear of increased risk of flash flooding and increased sediment load, etc., which affects very seriously the downstream areas. So these were already there, but because of climate change, the possibility of risks and even more, more severe risks is now quite high. Next slide. I'm not going to read out this slide, but the information I will leave for you is that this is one of the most important cash crop, most important is the pillar of our agricultural economy, tea production, which is the most important victim of climate change as far as the entire stretch from Darjeeling to the Dwars in North Bengal, entire Lower Assam, Upper Assam, up to part of Arunachal, and wherever we are growing tree. All the description you will see, so much of below rainfall, below normal rainfall, and so much of loss in tea production. And some of these researches have been commissioned by Tea Board of India and Avita, and there are Toklai, our Jorhat Center. They are into different kind of studies, and I just summarized the studies just to drive home the point that because of climate change, the tea industry is really, really facing very formidable losses in terms of economy. Next. In a very recent assessment, the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India, assessed the vulnerability of Northeast Indian states to climate change, and they found, it was in 2018, they found that Assam is the most vulnerable, followed by Mizoram, and then Arunachal Pradesh is also there, but it's positioned it at 7th. They consider different kind of parameters, but what they acknowledge that almost equally, or most of these northeastern states are much more vulnerable than many other states in Northeast India. This is Government of India's assessment. Last year, they made another assessment, next slide, and they said, Mizoram, in Northeast India, Mizoram, Assam and Arunachal Pradesh are now the most vulnerable in a revised assessment. This is again for your information. Next. So, what we saw is that climate change is a phenomenon, is an incident which has touched every development sector, which has influenced every sector of life, livelihoods, and every sector of development and infrastructure. And therefore, every sector is at risk if we do not deal with it with proper caution and proper preparedness. Everything that on which, from agriculture, pisciculture, to medicine, to whatever it is, from health, hygiene, everything that we need for a good quality life has been affected by climate change. Next. So, this is a new approach. New means we already know about it. So people are now talking more about nature-based solutions, ecosystem-based adaptation. A lot of things can be done which are eco-friendly, which do not jeopardize the ecological base of our region, but still can make a lot of difference to risks, in reducing risk. So we just, but there are many examples actually, so it's not difficult to find out those options. Next. My final take, I emphasize very strongly that we must have a good information base, good knowledge base about what is happening, how it is happening in terms of impact of climate change, how climate change scenario is building up, changing all over Northeast India in Arunachal Pradesh, how we can manage to get good data, good quality data so that research goes on. Then bring in science, technology, and innovation. Now they call it STIP, Science, Technology, and Innovation Policy. Very recently, I know that very recently there was a STIP policy draft for Arunachal Pradesh also. I think, I don't know whether it is public or not. So Government of India is preparing STIP, Science, Technology, Innovation Policy for each and every state. For Arunachal Pradesh, I think that draft has been initiated. So they are, including other things, they are trying to see how new technologies can be inducted to solve some of these problems, which will help in reducing the risk and increasing the resilience. So therefore, innovative agriculture, using artificial intelligence, big data analytic, or machine learning, that kind of new regime is now appearing everywhere. Nature-based solution, ecosystem-based adaptation, and indigenous knowledge and skills are very, very, very important. Throughout our work, we have found that we still can learn a lot, and then innovate, capitalizing on this indigenous knowledge and skills, and improve the mitigation and adaptation measures to a different level. And traditional food habits, very, very important. I mean, the previous two speakers have also mentioned that this is very important in terms of climate change also, so that we can maintain our carbon footprint as low as possible, which used to be the hallmark of all our indigenous food habits. We have to revive that. Next slide, and my last slide. We need to mainstream climate change and impact of climate change, as well as resilience in all our development policies, programs, and projects. Be anything. It can be PWD department, it can be water resource, it can be forest. Everybody can actually mainstream the concerns of climate and account for some futuristic climate impact in their policies and programs. So our policies need to be adaptive and flexible, or people call it climate smart, in all development sectors, and therefore adaptation, resilience, and transformational development should be a common policy perspective. That is the new slogan. Adaptation, resilience, and transformation and development. The ultimate goal of all development policies. We have a national action plan for climate change for entire state, for entire country. For each of our state, we have a state action plan on climate change. For Arunachal also we have. But what is the extent of its implementation? That's the question. In most cases, the reviews are saying that mostly, most of the SAPCCs have gone unimplemented. But now, they have become more than 10 years old now. So it is time to revise them. The Assam's State action plan is undergoing a revision. I'm sure Arunachal is also taking measures to revise because a lot of new things have happened. If it has not done, I think maybe the recommendations which will go from this seminar should be sent to the team who is revising, that is revising this Arunachal action plan. And they can capitalize on learning from such forums. And then, the STIP policy is already there in Arunachal Pradesh. Climate insurance, it's a business tool, an economic tool, but still providing some respite to potential climate victims, right? Clean and renewable energy and overall impetus for the entire region because we are lagging behind in that. And then alternatives to climate affected livelihood. We must have state level plans for that. The central level plans are there, but implementation has to be done at state level and at local level. And then finally, policy and practice versus customs and traditions. We must strike a balance. It is Northeast India. We have our traditional indigenous practices, cultures, customs, institutions, and then we have a plethora of other initiatives coming from the development side. And then in many cases, we have seen conflicts arising. We must be very careful about this. So with this, kind of discourse that I usually like to, indulge in, I would say thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Parthe Jyoti Dasji, for highlighting such vital information and knowledge on climate change in Northeast India and its implications for risk and resilience. Up next, I would like to invite on stage for a speech presentation Shri Rituraj Phukanji, founder, Indigenous Peoples Climate Justice Forum and National Coordinator, Biodiversity for the Climate Reality Project India, member, IUCN with experience of climate change at Antarctica, the Arctic, and across India. Sir will speak on warming impacts on biodiversity of the Eastern Himalayas. Please, sir.
A very good afternoon to everyone. Honorable Chief Guest and Deputy Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh, Honorable Speaker of Arunachal Pradesh Assembly, CCF Arunachal Pradesh, and State Information Commissioner. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you for this opportunity. I have been coming to Arunachal Pradesh for a long, long time for bird watching. If any of you can tell me the name of the birds, we know that, Thomas Lovejoy, one of the most famous biologists who passed away in December, once said, if you take care of your birds, you take care of most of the world's environmental problems. So does anybody know? This is from Arunachal Pradesh. I took this photograph about 10 years back from Eagle Nest. Yeah, it's a ward strogon, not found in many other places in the world. Long time back, I used to think that this biodiversity impacts of climate change actually means what we see mostly in the photographs, the polar bears, how they are affected, the penguins, how they are losing their eyes. I saw that myself. I went to Antarctica for an expedition and then across the Arctic. But in the Arctic, what struck me was during the course of citizen science experiments, we did some mesocosms on how the microorganisms are affected and how that disrupts the entire wave of life. And of course, now we also know that what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. It affects us all. Already the loss of sea ice is disrupting our monsoons, for example. And so it adds up to all the problems that our speakers have pointed out in the previous presentations. Next slide, please. So there is a connection between the planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. On all of it, it is not new. Our understanding is evolving. It was first described in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment in the year, launched in the year 2001 and published in 2005. But I think one of the most significant for me personally was that during the Paris Agreement in December 2001, a report called The Messengers was published. What birds teach us about climate change and solutions for nature and people. That remains one of the most important references for what is happening to the birds of the world and how it is affecting people and what it means, because birds are indicator species. Unfortunately, 164 species were studied, but none from our biodiverse regions. So we have to change that. We have to change. Arunachal Pradesh has so many birds, more than any other state in India. The eastern Himalayas has so many birds. I think it is the second or third most diverse biodiversity spots in terms of endemic avian biodiversity. Next slide, please. So the eastern Himalayas are also among the crisis ecoregions, some besides being global biodiversity hotspots. The lives of our people, our indigenous communities, are intertwined with the biodiversity around us. Our cultures, our dance, our food, everything depends on the biodiversity. My friend, the forest man of India, Jadhav Payang, would often say in his speeches that we need to conserve our biodiversity to ensure that we can have good quality apong, because we use 100 types of vegetation to prepare the liquor, and without that, that is conserving biodiversity, because 100 types of vegetation, you're supporting so many types of birds and animals as well. As was rightly pointed out by the previous speakers, a lot of focus is now on indigenous systems, on traditional knowledge. And I was at COP26, and this was perhaps the most nature-focused COP. There was a lot of talk about, there were declarations on forest, and there was a lot of talk about involving indigenous knowledge systems. And also the fact that nature-based solutions cannot be, again, a corporate solution. You cannot have one solution nature-based for every community. India has 700 indigenous communities, so each one will probably have a different solution to the same global problems. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a few slides about the biodiversity of the Eastern Himalayas. Our region is about has about 163 globally threatened species. With the entire Eastern Himalayas. Out of that, 144 are found in Northeast India. Next slide, please. It is also known as the cradle of flowering plants, and this is very important for Arunachal Pradesh, of course, with so many orchids and all. This is perhaps the world's richest alpine flora region, with 1/3 of the species endemic to this region. Nearly 50% of the total flowering plants recorded in India are from Northeast region. Next slide, please. We also have more than 700 species of orchids, and out of that, 545 are found in Arunachal Pradesh. 12 are endangered, 16 are vulnerable, and 1 are near threatened. All these are figures that have come out because of research by young people who are going into the field and doing all the hard work, and I'm sure these will be upgraded now. Next slide, please. So these are some of in the red dots, these are some of the protected areas in the Eastern Himalayas. But one of the least understood effects of climate change is on the vegetation. And all these vegetation types, the tropical, subtropical, temperate, whatever we have here, we have talked about wetland ecosystems, all of these are changing. And with the vegetation change, we lose habitats. Next slide, please. These are some of the species that have been discovered mostly in Arunachal Pradesh in the last few years. Last February, the three-banded rose fins, a new bird, a beautiful red bird, was found here. And this is the latest addition to the list of birds in India. Then a plant species, alpine plant species, was found. The crying keelback was discovered in Arunachal Pradesh in 2019, which adds to the list of about 110 species in Northeast India, which Arunachal Pradesh having 55 of them. And I was just told by somebody before the start of the session that I think 3 or 4 are in the pipeline, new species, new snakes that are going to be declared soon, all discovered from Arunachal Pradesh. Also 5 species of fish were discovered in 2019. And in recent years, primates, including white-cheeked macaque and the Arunachal macaque, the leaf muntjac, and birds like the Himalayan forest thrush, and of course the Bugun leochikla, which brought me to Arunachal Pradesh for the very first time about 10, 12 years back. Next slide, please. So not only climate change, fragmentation of the habitat also makes a huge impact, and that is happening across the Northeast, and especially for endemic species, fragmentation and land use change is a big challenge. And unfortunately, development aspirations ensure that a lot of these endemic habitats are being slowly lost and fragmented. Next slide, please. We already heard a lot about the Hindu Kush Himalaya assessment. I just wanted to add the small lines at the bottom. One of the things that was found in the report was that large areas of grasslands, alpine meadows, and wetlands, which are all very vital wildlife habitats in our region, are all disappearing. And with the projections of 2/3 of glacial loss, even with warming being limited to 1.5 degree above pre-industrial levels, and the fact that the region has already warmed by 1.3 degrees Celsius, means we are going to see a lot of changes. Next slide, please. This was again about, I've already covered this, I guess. Next slide, please. Okay, let's look at some of the iconic animals from the northeastern region. Of course, one is the rhino from Assam, the greater one-horned rhino. The projected disruption of monsoons could deplete the grasslands, number one. That will also, cause many changes. Like if the rhinos may stray out more from the protected areas, leading to more conflicts, more poaching vulnerabilities. In Nepal, in fact, WWF study said that all the rhinos may be lost to India because the grasslands are shifting towards the south. Next slide, please. Elephants are very vulnerable to climate change. They have something called the heat stress. Like us, they get more angry when it's hot. They need a lot of water, and with the grasslands changing and with less fragmented habitats, they tend to go into areas. I myself worked with mitigation of human-elephant conflicts for over 20 years in the Nagaon-Karbi Anglong borders, and we see that grasslands have practically been replaced by invasive creepers and shrubs across the Karbi foothills, and therefore the elephants tend to spend most of the time in the paddy fields, because that is the only thing left for them to eat. And then we already talked about how lightning affects, killed elephants in that same area where I was working actually. So all these climate impacts, and last year there were photographs from Africa of 5 giraffes dying at one place because of the drought. I think some of you remember that. And then 200 elephants were dead in Zimbabwe just 4 or 5 years back because of water scarcity. There are iconic newspaper photographs where elephants in Kerala were found to have been killed by tigers over a fight for a water hole. And then in Delhi, monkeys were said to be killing each other in fight for water. So therefore, I say water is like the local issue of global climate change for people and for biodiversity. Next slide, please. The tiger, of course, again, is one of the most affected by climate change. The nature of the tiger habitats across India are changing. That makes it difficult for them to survive when number one. Number two, in places where the grasslands tend to shift to another place, the deer they hunt may actually shift within the protected area, but the tiger cannot follow because they are very territorial, and there are fights with the reigning existing big cat. It could be a leopard as well, and one of them will be killed. So these have already been documented, and in the Sundarbans area, of course, there is the threat of submersion of the entire habitat as well. So these are all climate change impacts on the tiger habitat, and there is more. Next slide, please. In Bhutan and also in Arunachal Pradesh, tigers now are observed at higher altitudes. So we don't have any problem with that, but the thing is they are going into the areas of the snow leopard, and they are hunting on prey that is that the snow leopard is adapted at hunting, because up there are no deer or antelopes. What they have is this mountain goats, ibexes, and others. That means it's a new threat, emerging threat for the snow leopard's survival as well. Next slide, please. No talk about biodiversity can be complete without indigenous peoples and local communities. As I said, their effects are already be done, but for the first time in the history of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP26 conference at Glasgow, 28 indigenous people were nominated from each of the 7 UN indigenous socio-cultural regions to engage directly as knowledge holders and share experiences as experts with the government negotiators. However, we did not have anybody from this big, vast region with over 200 indigenous communities. So I think that is something that must be rectified. There has to be representation from Northeast India, from the Eastern Himalayas in these global negotiations. Next slide, please. Even back in 2019, the Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services from the IPBES actually said that about 70% of the remaining natural places on Earth are either managed, protected by indigenous people and local communities. So they are critical to addressing both the climate and the biodiversity crisis. Next slide, please. I'm going to quote a few lines from the Glasgow Pact, which emerged out of COP26. It recognized the important role of civil society, including youth and indigenous peoples, in addressing and responding to climate change and highlighting the urgent need for action. There's a strong achievement and historic progress under the UNFCCC to bring the indigenous knowledge holders to the table to voice solutions and humanize the impacts of climate change. Governments also recognize the global interlinked crisis of climate change and biodiversity loss, and this was the first, and the critical role of nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches in delivering benefits for climate adaptation and mitigation. Next slide, please. It further recognized the importance of protecting, conserving, and restoring ecosystems to deliver crucial services, including acting as net carbon sinks, reducing vulnerability to climate change impacts, and supporting sustainable livelihoods, including for indigenous people and local communities. These decisions mark a reorientation of policy towards nature to stabilize the global climate system through engaging with the expertise of indigenous people, local communities, and their diverse knowledge systems. So, therefore, this COP was known as the nature-specific COP. This year, we are going to meet again at Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and next year in Dubai for COP27 and 28. And this year, the focus is going to be on loss and damage. And loss and damage basically is considered as the third pillar of the Paris Agreement after adaptation and mitigation. Until now, it has been ignored because the developed countries do not want to pay the billions of dollars that affected poor countries who did nothing to cause this climate change in the first place, are being affected by floods and all that, but they cannot respond. So this money will be negotiated this year. So I'm sure all of the Northeast must have proper representation in this global negotiations so that we get part of those loss and damage money so that the lives of our people can be improved. Next. So that was the last slide actually. This book was published from the US on Earth Day 2 or 3 years back. I wrote the impacts on the global biodiversity from climate change. So if anybody wants to learn more, you're please welcome to read that. Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Sri Rituraj Bhukanji, for sharing with us the warming impacts on biodiversity of the Eastern Himalayas. Up next, we have our special focus topic for the event, that is the presentation on Pake Declaration. May I please request Sri Rajesh ASG, Chief Conservator of Forest, Environment and Climate Change, Government of Arunachal Pradesh, for the presentation on Pake Declaration. Please.
Yeah, thank you so much. Can I have the presentation? Thank you. Honorable Deputy Chief Minister, Arunachal Pradesh, Honorable Speaker, Arunachal Pradesh Legislative Assembly, Honorable Members of the Legislative Assembly, the ZPMs, distinguished delegates, colleagues, friends, and colleagues from media. Very good afternoon to all of you. So I will not take much time as we are already lagging. So I'll be going a little faster, but highlighting on the important cornerstones of this declaration. Next slide. So much of the background about the vulnerability, the requirements of adaptation and mitigation have already been spoken to, so that has made my work a little easier. So I'm not going to stick to the points concerning the vulnerability aspects, so I'll move a little forward. So two key points we need to understand. All we are going to be impacted is all about water availability, the availability of the resilience to deal with the changes in temperature. These are the two cornerstones. At the same time, we have a strong point of advantage that being a growing stage, it is an opportunity right now available with us to grow in a climate resilient way. Instead of retrospecting for climate adaptation later, like many other Indian states or many other developed landscapes in the world have to do, we don't need to retrofit. Rather, we can grow in our development trajectory in a climate resilient manner so that we are robust in our investments and able to deal with the challenges of climate change. Next. So, just to highlight a little bit about the structural actions and policy measures which have already gone into climate change response in the state before Pake Declaration. So, this is the first state action plan on climate change, which is currently under revision, as many states are doing. We are also revising this with the expert involvements, and it will be soon. But the point to acknowledge here is that in the first SAPCC itself, we acknowledge the presence of extreme climatic events and water stresses to water resources and nature-based food systems. So this has been amply highlighted by the previous speakers, so I am not going into the other finer details. Next. So this is just a collection that though international community have been speaking about climate change, yes, it is real, it is impacting us, and we have recent evidence from scientific and from non-scientific, I mean to say like the general parlance as well. Many newspaper reports, many scientific reports all have highlighted from time to time the impacts of climate change in our state. The recent one, which is a response to a question asked in our parliament, there is a highlighting that the basins in Brahmaputra and Ganges might get affected. That can also impact our water availability in the time. Next. So now coming to Arunachal Pradesh and climate change, ample amount of information has been shared, so I will not stick to this. Next. So coming to agenda in COP from India, as you know, Honorable Prime Minister presented to the world the Panchamrit gift, highlighting 5 key points which actually turned around the global, like the fear for crossing 1.5 to bring back 1.7 or 2.0 to back to 1.5 track. Those contribution is basically from these 5 Panchamrit gifts. So first is India's non-fossil energy capacity to reach 500 gigawatts, which is a non-fossil, like a carbon-friendly track. Next, meet 50% of India's requirements for renewables by 2030, coinciding with the sustainable development. Then reduce total projected carbon emissions to 1 billion tons from now by 2030. And by 2030, we will also reduce carbon intensity of the economy to less than 45%. And by 70, we will achieve net zero. This is the set of 5 killer, the transforming commitments which we made to the world. Next. So taking cue from this, the government of Arunachal Pradesh also was deliberating on the issues related to climate change when the world was deliberating. And on the date of 13th of November, the cabinet, in its historic decision at Parquet Tiger Reserve, adopted the Parquet Climate Change Declaration, paving the way for a climate resilient and responsive Arunachal Pradesh, and to realize it by 2047, coinciding with the 100 years of our independence. So this declaration is the action and way forward for climate resilient Arunachal Pradesh. And it has 5 major strategies and 75 supporting pillar strategies. So 5 major strategies are called Panchadaras, reflecting the 5 major river systems in our state. Next. So can you please click this video? Can you please click at this slide? Yeah, as you see, this is a short glimpse of what happened in Parquet on 13th of November.
This is 12th cabinet meeting for the year.
Those were the glimpses from the 12th cabinet meeting, and rather the first ever cabinet meeting of Arunachal Pradesh held outside the capital city, to recognize that in a protected area, to recognize the importance of nature and the ability of nature-based solutions and climate resilient approaches to deal with climate change. And that set the history not only for Arunachal Pradesh but even for our country. That was the historic moment by which Arunachal Pradesh became the first Indian state to have a ministerial level declaration on climate response. And we also qualified through this action to show a leadership to the world that we are also within 60 such subnational actions in the world. So we are within that elite group in terms of our policy response. Now, this is the notification of the Parquet Tiger Reserve Climate Change and Responsive Declaration. This was notified on December 1st, and it's available in the public domain for all of us to understand and do actions in the field. So now the question is, when we hear Parquet Declaration, it is not something that the government has to implement. It has space for everyone to act. So the action responsibility not only rests with government, it rests with every one of us in whatever way possible. Next. So as I mentioned before, it has 5 major strategies. They are focusing on environment, forest and climate change, health and well-being, sustainable and adaptive living, livelihoods and opportunities, and evidence generation collaborative action. These 5 pillars in a way summarizes most of the concerns expressed by our previous speakers about the ways to respond to climate change. Next. So to focus a little quickly, environment and forest and climate change sector, which is mostly the nature side, where we will follow climate resilient forestry, climate resilient water resource management, renewable energy and energy efficiency. And on health and well-being, our focusing is on climate resilient healthcare, including the infrastructure. And then on education, to build the knowledge base to respond effectively to climate change. Thereafter, on sustainable and adaptive living, it's all about climate resilient sustainable habitats, then sustainable transport systems. Next. and on livelihood and opportunities, which is a key pillar of resilience and the overall context of adaptation to respond to climate change. The actions will be on climate resilient agriculture, horticulture, climate resilient animal husbandry and fishery, and complemented with the skill development. And on evidence generation collaborative action, the major engagements are on disaster management, research and knowledge development, gender equity, and climate change. Next. So I'm not going to the details of all the strategies identified. There is a lengthy list of 75 strategies. So I'm just summarizing for your quick understanding how these strategies have been prioritized. Like you can say climate resilient forestry, there are 11 strategies. Water resource management, 5 strategies. Renewable energy, 7. Climate resilient healthcare, 7 strategies. Climate resilient sustainable habitats, 9, and so on, as you can see across the major pillars. Next. And now coming to the implementation, how we are going to implement this declaration. So it will be backed by pragmatic action plans, focusing on short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals. The short-term goals, we are just there, 2023, just a year ahead. And medium-term 2030, and long-term 2047, which will be like the 100 years of our independence. And more significantly, all these action plans are to be given by a definite percentage of the plan outlay, which is also remarkable development in the country. Probably no state is allocating a certain percentage of the budget exclusive for climate actions. That way also Arunachal is showing a way forward to the country. And then monitoring and reporting to be facilitated by the institutional arrangement, state, district, and panchayat level. This is yet another dimension of our leadership, that we are taking climate action to the grassroots level. It's not only at a line departmental level activity. It will be taken to the grassroots level with the involvement of PRAs and developmental agencies working in the field. We will be translating into action. And finally, this will be monitored through clear output and outcome framework developed by the Niti Aayog. Next. Now, at state level, I just mentioned what is the guiding mechanism. We have a high power committee chaired by Honorable Chief Minister, Arunachal Pradesh, and the members of that committee are comprising of the ministers of the relevant subject areas, and along with the subject matter experts. So this is the guidance arrangement on implementation of this declaration. Next. At district level, of course, a facilitation committee is set up with the leadership of Deputy Commissioner of the district concerned, along with the subject matter experts and accredited development agencies operating in the districts. So what we are aiming forward is a collaborative and inclusive action. Next. At local panchayat level, which I highlighted earlier, which is unique, that first time we are taking climate action to grassroots level, which will be anchored on a federation of developmental agencies. As you know, there are several developmental agencies, and like there is a water and health and sanitation committee, there is a village forest committee, and so many development committees are operating. So to bring climate action, which is an activity demanding cross-departmental engagement, we will have a federation of such developmental agencies under the leadership of the village head, the panchayat head. Next. And now at state level, at department level, how we are implementing. So as I mentioned before, we will have a short-term, medium-term, and long-term action plans. And here is a summary of such action plans, which have been presented by the various departments of the state in the cabinet and getting translated into action. So here you can see the extent of involvement and engagement that has already gone into action. And for a summary, we have 162 short-term actions, 222 medium-term actions, and 126 long-term actions. Next. And just a quick review of what has happened so far in terms of acting. Under Strategy 65, we have done capacity building for different departments to implement this declaration through their action plans. Next. This is yet another recent review of the action plan implementation at the level of Chief Secretary. So the focus was again on pragmatic actions to be presented for budget meetings, for budget allocation, and exploration of potential carbon markets to leverage funding, and also for capacity building and collaboration with the knowledge partners. Next. Now coming back to implementation again, action number 65, which is strategy number 65 in the pocket declaration, which is all about green skill development programs. So we have been imparting green skill across different subjects. This is one such event on fire management. Next. and on wild beekeeping. Next. Next. And this is on bird identification and ornithology, which is having great supporting role for promotion of ecotourism. Next. Yeah, so some of the other actions are already happening under the climate change project, which we are implementing. Just for sharing the quick evidence with you, we'll just take you through some of the developments. Next. So here it's a reforestation activity happening in Jote village with a species model, which is in tune with the aspirations of the local community. Next. And this is about renewal, rejuvenating a spring. Next. And this is about water conservation plus aquaforestry coupled with fisheries. So this is a action targeting towards water conservation, climate resilience, and economic resilience for the communities. Next. And on agriculture, promotion of sustainable agriculture. Next. And agroforestry, this is quite an option for the mitigating many of the challenges which we face in the hilly slopes for cultivation. Next. And on horticulture, of course, sure, it is all for economic resilience of the communities. Next. And for further development, for the livestock management, and also for the livestock in the higher ranges and plus the wild stock. Next. And this, besides, we have been also taking advocacy and publicity, and we have also participated in national level workshops. Next. Highlighting the role the local level actions, subnational level actions on climate change can do, taking the example from Arunachal Pradesh. This was the event we did in Delhi, which was inaugurated by Honorable Minister for Forest, Environment and Climate Change, and also participated by the Chief Secretary of the state. Next. And that was all in short and quick about Parquet Declaration. The declaration document is available on the website, and if any have any particular questions, we can answer during lunch or in the post-lunch session. Otherwise, also you can drop emails to us. We will respond to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sri Rajesh SG, for your presentation on Parquet Declaration. Moving ahead, may I please request our chief guest for the event, Sri Chawna Menchie, Honorable Deputy Chief Minister, Arunachal Pradesh, to share some few words with us. Please, sir.
Honorable Speaker, Arunachal Pradesh State Legislative Assembly, Sri Pasang Dorji Sonaji, Honorable State Information Commissioner, Sri Gumjum Haidarji, Honorable MLAs present on today's occasion, environmental scientist and climate change expert, Aranyak, Guwahati, Assam, Dr. Partha Das, Chief Conservator of Forest, Environment and Climate Change, Sri Rajesh S., former Chief Scaling Operation and international subject expert on climate change adaptation and mountain livelihood, Isimod, Kathmandu, Sri Trupat Chaudhary, founder Indigenous Peoples Climate Justice Forum and National Coordinator Biodiversity for the Climate Reality Project India, Sri Rituraj Fukan, Joint Secretary and Program Director, Nature, Environment and Wildlife Society, Ms. Ajanta De, members of the panel, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen present, and media friends. First of all, I would like to thank Honorable Speaker Arunachal Pradesh Legislative Assembly, Sri Pasang Dorji Sona, who is the chairman of the Golden Jubilee celebration of Arunachal Pradesh, for conducting seminar as a part of Golden Jubilee celebration of Arunachal Pradesh on climate change and sustainable future, the Arunachal Pradesh perspective. We all are aware of the effect created by global warming on nature and climate, which are caused by activities of human civilization for want of development, which are having a negative impact on environment, posing a serious threat to the very existence of almost every living creature, including humans. Climate change is one of the greatest threats to Earth ecosystem and global security. Climate change knows no borders, and it presents an existential challenges to us all. According to International Panel on Climate Change 6th Assessment Report, there is a chances of crossing the global warming level of 1.5 Celsius in the next decades. Further, climate change is expected to worsen over the next century as greenhouse gas emission continues to increase. India, too, is expected to experience greater impact of global warming in the time to come, and thereby and there may be an increase in frequency, severity, duration of heat waves. Monsoon may become more erratic as per the studies conducted by the experts. There may be more frequent droughts and floods. The Indian seas may witness more sea level rise. There has already been increase in sea level in the last 2 decades. Tropical cyclones may increase in numbers with the increase in carbon dioxide contents in the ocean. The seawater may become more acidic. This has been already explained by our expert. Therefore, the next 2 decades are going to be very crucial. The 2-degree rise in global temperature may come earlier than expected. It may have a huge impact on India, especially on agriculture, health, and water security. India is confronted with challenge of addressing such impact. Hence, we need some kind of necessity and urgency in mitigating climate change impact on our ecosystem and food security. According to Global Sustainable Development Report 2019, approximately 900 million people who live in the world's mountain region are among the most sensitive to climate change. A study carried out by the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, along with IIT Mandi and IIT Guwahati last year and supported by the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India, said that 8 states in the country, namely Jharkhand, Mizoram, Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Assam, Bihar, Arunachal Pradesh, and West Bengal, all in the eastern India, are found to have higher vulnerability to climate change. Arunachal Pradesh, strategically located in the highly rich seismic zone of Indian Himalayan region, is the largest hill state in the northeast India and has rich biological diversity, perhaps the richest in the country, together with vibrant and rich ethnic and socio-cultural diversity, which have for generations live as one with nature. The mountainous terrain, dense jungles, and huge rivers made us one of the 12 biodiversity hotspots which have forever been used as natural resource by our ancestors who developed a uniquely healthy relationship with this land and its bounty. As far as biodiversity is concerned, we have more than 5,000 species of flowering plants. 238 plants are endemic to the state. Center of origin for a number of crop plant species. More than 500 varieties of orchids, more than 500 species of fauna, about 85 torrential mammals, and shelters 4 major cats: tiger, leopard, clouded leopard, snow leopard, and more than 650 bird species. Slight variation in climate condition coupled with extreme weather might impose challenge to the state's rich biological as well as cultural diversity. Sustainability of social and economic development and the livelihood environment in the state. Arunachal Pradesh being an entirely tribal state, forest has been the mainstay for the livelihood of local people dependent on forest resources. As per the India State Forest Report 2021, January 13, 2021, the total forest coverage is 66,430.67 square kilometer, that is 79.33% of the total geographical area. Further, the ISFR 2021 indicates that Arunachal Pradesh has witnessed a loss of 257 square kilometer of forest cover compared to the 2019 assessment. The main reason for the negative change in forest cover are diversion of forest land for development purposes and also natural impact like landslide, flood, etc. The impact of climate change is already visible in Arunachal Pradesh. The 5 rivers of Arunachal Pradesh, that is Siang, Lohit, Tirap, Subansiri, and Kameng, loses its original green emerald colors and has now diminished due to increase in turbidity. On November 2021, we have witnessed mortality of large number of fishes in Kameng River as the river water turns black and muddy. Satellite imagery had indicated that some sort of a landslide, avalanche, melting of glacier, which is also an effect of global warming. Our river basins are beautiful site for picnic spots, and large numbers of people from the neighboring state and our own people come to these rivers to have picnics. However, we have a habit of dumping the plastic waste in the river basin and river banks. This accumulated plastic waste get washed away by the river water in summer or the rainy season, thereby endangering the aquatic lives in the rivers, seas, and oceans. Friends, it is a matter of great worry that our freshwater fish is also diminishing day by day due to rampant illegal fishing by means of electric current through generator, blasting, etc., which needs to be completely banned across the state. In the same manner, all kinds of hunting needs to be banned by the administration to protect our rich wildlife, and plucking of our edible plants, forest vegetation for commercial purposes needs to be stopped to preserve the natural vegetation. It should be restricted for domestic consumption only. Likewise, people living in the fringe areas of wildlife sanctuaries and near the reserve forests often depends on the forest vegetation and hunting for their livelihood. They need to be given alternate source of livelihood so that the natural habitation of the wildlife are not disturbed. Therefore, I urge upon the expert or the think tank of the government to come up with the proposal of alternate source of livelihood for those who depends on the forest vegetation and hunting animals and birds for their livelihoods in the vicinity of the wildlife areas and wildlife corridors. When I was minister in charge of agriculture, I traveled to Dirang and Kalaktang area in West Kameng district, and I was upset to find that the apple orchards are diminishing in those areas as a result of climate change due to global warming. Currently, there is an institutional gap in the forest conservation system when it comes to addressing the climate risks on forest ecosystem and biodiversity conservation arising from the interaction of climate change and social, economic, and political factors. This gap has to be filled up by the academicians, university, college students, and bring awareness on the conservation of biodiversity to the masses. Zoom and shifting cultivation has been our way of life. However, during earlier days, we used to give sufficient time for the land to rejuvenate itself. But now we are coming back to the same areas for zooming in lesser time, leading deforestation. It now needs to be substituted with sustainable and settled agriculture and horticulture. Our government has taken up various measures to improve the farming and to bring in change in the farming techniques through farm mechanization, terrace cultivation, credit-linked mechanization. Now, the former director Isimot, he has presented me these books on transitioning shifting cultivation to the resilient farming system in South and Southwest Asia, guideline on policymakers and development practitioner. So when I go to academic institute, when I get some important platform, I always speak that I'm not an expert, I'm not a research scholar, I'm not an environmental expert also, but I can facilitate. So as a policy maker, whatever you have suggested, I'm accepting it, and whatever suggestion you have given to control shifting cultivation here, I'm accepting it, and definitely in Arunachal Pradesh also, we will try to implement it. You have especially mentioned about the salt, that the approach on salt technology. So this, I'm talking about the terrace cultivation. I, as a finance and planning minister, last few years, those areas which is rice deficit area, we have given the terrace cultivation scope to those areas so that they can produce rice there. But at the same time, you said that there is some limitation on the salt approach, so we will definitely think about this also, this thing. You see, when I go to my village of birthplace, and when I see the rivers, I think of my childhood. During my childhood, when I take bath, when I swim in these rivers, it was very deep. And today it is knee deep. It has become very shallow. Sometimes I discuss with the villagers, I discuss with the village elders, what is the reason. When I sit together, I discuss what is the reason for this shallowness of this river, where from it comes. And mostly our waters originate from spring water, the small riverine, it originates from spring water. So I said that you go and see the sources of the sources of this river. why is the cause for shallowness of this river, and how to protect those this thing, how to manage the springshed management, all these things. I think under the SDG goal, the RFRI, the Rainforest Reserve Research Institute, Jorhat, they have been given a task in Namsai district as a aspiration district to manage the springshed management there in Namsai district. And I come from a community, we are a valley dwellers. We are a valley dwellers. And the irrigation for wet rice cultivation has been from time immemorial. In our area, you will see the khamti rice we call khautai. It's the aromatic rice, glutinous rice. The most very tasty rice. From time immemorial, we have been cultivating it through irrigation. So now the irrigation, also, the water where from we get the irrigation is all from the spring water. The springs are drying up. That is why I have taken up these issues with our departmental experts or departmental engineers and the officers. These spring waters, not only in Namsai district, all over Arunachal Pradesh, has to be protected. Some of the NGOs are working on this. And departmentally also, whether it is forest department or whether it is agriculture department, I think we have to do something to protect the source of water, to protect the vegetation in those areas. And this is the call of the day now, to have to maintain our water level, to have this water. And that is what this, and thank you very much for giving us this guideline for the shifting cultivation. Community-based forest conservation could provide best conservation opportunities coupled with properly planned developmental activities to support such community initiative. During the global community at the Conference of Parties, COP26 of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, to fight climate, Prime Minister Narendra Modi had presented his Panchamrit, stating that India will take its non-fossil energy capacity to 500 gigawatt by 2030. Will meet 50% of its energy requirement from renewable energy by 2030 and reduce the total projected carbon emission by 1 million tons from now till 2030. He further said, by 2030, India will reduce the carbon intensity of its economy by less than 45%. And by year 2070, will achieve the target of net zero. Reiterating this commitment, the government of Arunachal Pradesh, under the leadership of Chief Minister Sri Pema Khanduji, has resolved to accelerate comprehensive, smart, climate resilient and inclusive development of the people and land of the downlit mountain with its mighty rivers and abundant natural resources, with all-round efforts by adapting the Pake Tiger Reserve 2047 Ministerial Declaration on Climate Change, Resilient and Responsive Arunachal Pradesh. We have unanimously agreed to prioritize. Of course, this has been already explained by our CCF. We have unanimously agreed to prioritize the 5 broad themes that is known as Panchadharas on our 5 rivers, envisaging a multi-sectoral whole of government and whole of society approach in our pathway towards low emission and climate resilient development. That is environment and forest and climate change, health and well-being for all, sustainable and adaptive living, livelihood and opportunities, and evidence generation and collective collaborative action. Arunachal is known as the storehouse of hydropower. Of late, we have identified 29 hydro projects to be executed by CPSUs with an estimated capacity of 32,000 megawatt. some of which have already been given to NHPC, NIPCO, Satluj Jal Vidyut Nigam, and Tehri Hydro Development Corporation, etc. And many are in the pipeline. This is in tune with the Honorable Prime Minister's commitment made in COP26 at Glasgow. We intend to encourage sector-wise resource allocation for climate resilience and response within respective departments' budgetary envelopes for coordinated, systematic, sustained, and ambitious engagement in the state of Arunachal Pradesh. Focusing on research and development, we aim to develop capacities and enhance technical know-how on climate resilience mitigation and responsive strategies through collaboration with the academia and think tanks. A priority area would be documentation of traditional knowledge system of indigenous communities to preserve and propagate adaptive climate resilient method and locally sustainable practices. Our government is proactively ensuring disruptive justice. In the line with our development philosophy, all our sector action plans will promote equitable gender roles and responsibilities and protect the most vulnerable, especially women and children, from the adverse impact of climate change. The government will establish a multi-layer governing framework backed by institutional arrangement at the state, district, and village level to effectively steer and facilitate the implementation of the Pake Tiger Reserve 2047 declaration. This landmark declaration was taken for the benefit of future generations in recognition of the potential contribution Arunachal Pradesh can make towards the fulfillment of the targets and goals within the national contribution of India in pursuance of the Paris Agreements on climate change, considering the forests and natural resources wealth we have. Through this declaration, we are going to address both the risks to the economy and the ecosystem and do our best to protect the people from challenges posed by the ongoing climate change and its impact on biodiversity. Friends, being tribals, living with nature is part of culture and tradition. For centuries, tribal nature and centuries, tribal and nature are living and nurturing each other. If we study our folklores and folk songs, we can find how our ancestors preserved and nurtured the mother nature. So now time has come that we must adapt our own traditions for coexisting with the nature so that our future generation would also get the same enrichment which our ancestors left for us. I'm confident that this light of climate change actions starting from the dawn-lit mountains of India in Arunachal Pradesh will spread across the length and breadth of the country, fostering collective action to gain climate resilience and climate well-being for all Indians, transcending political, social, and cultural barriers. Thank you. Jai Hind, Jai Arunachal.
Thank you very much, Honorable Deputy Chief Minister, Sir, Shri Chaunamanchi, for sharing your good words with us. Ladies and gentlemen, now it is time for some expert intervention. May I please invite on stage Ms.
declaration was time-bound targets. Always we define objectives, outputs, outcomes, but time-bound targets are very, very important. Like the COP26 has already stated that if we are not able to limit to 1.5 degrees centigrade at 2100, and if we continue to go on like this, then by 2030, 2035, 40, many things will go beyond our control. So it's very important that we just not wish things, but we have time-bound targets. And I, as a conservation practitioner, would like to look at those transformations, would like to contribute to those transformations which are necessary to have us reach those points. After what our Honorable Deputy Chief Minister has already said, I really feel overwhelmed that how Arunachal Pradesh government is taking this forward, and the 75 strategies is not a wish list, but they have already started identifying. And as we have seen, that climate change is such a big issue, sir, that it encompasses our all aspects of life, living, our existence on this beautiful planet. So I would not be able to talk on all the aspects, but I would like to share my experience on one particular aspect which I have very strongly found in the Packet Declaration for carbon credit realization, and how a little experience of what we have done in building climate resilience communities has helped us in achieving that carbon finance model. So if I may have, yes, so I would look at the synergistic solutions, because we all know that alone no one of us can do anything. It has to be a synergy between all the players, and that's what I will try to focus on. So let's go to the next slide. So what we are not very famous. We Nature, Environment, Wildlife Society since 1991. We are working in the field of wildlife conservation, environment, ecology, health, sustainable livelihood awareness, and it is for the protection of the ecosystems and ecosystem services, because our life is every day dependent on them. We are nowhere without these ecosystems and ecosystem services. So if we have to have a healthy human society, we need to protect these ecosystems. Next. So whenever I show this slide, that what is the global scenario of climate change, what are the causes, industrialization, energy use, agriculture, each is contributing to the effects of the climate change, rising temperature, etc., etc. And the question that I face from the students, the panchayat members, the legislative assembly people, when we go and try to make them aware, is that, but these are the ways on which we live. How can we go without consumer practices? How can we live without livestock? How can we live without transport? And you are saying that all these are the causes for the climate change. So what is the difference that we have to create? Some plus and some minus. So those tweakings are necessary in those everyday things that industrialization has to happen. We have to build transport. We have to use energy. We have to use resource. We have to mitigate pollution. We have to have consumerism, and that will generate a lot of pollution. But we have to have sustainability in production. We have to have sustainability in consumption. When we eat something, we have to think that whether it is it is required that I eat a thing that is coming from maybe a green apple from California, or I have wonderful apples from my own country, from my own region. Is it not sufficient that I have to get so much climate footprint to get a green apple from California, or a green, like a Californian walnut, when we see in Spencer's or other various Walmarts? So that is the choice that we have to make, that whether we go with the usual style, the business as usual, doing as usual. So we have to do all these which are causing the effect of all these that we have seen. But certain tweakings are necessary, some choices are necessary, certain policy level interventions are necessary, so that whatever we are doing are having the minimal impact of keeping that 1.5 degrees centigrade to a limit where we can attain it at 2100, at the end of the century and not something within a decade. So if the next slide. So that IPCC report also, everyone has said that it has set very certain things in stone, like carbon dioxide. We know that formation, C and O2. Now this methane, it's also very big contributor, and agriculture comes with lot of methane generation. So what we have to think is how we can do the things, but not business as usual, not doing as usual. Certain differences that we can create there, like jhum cultivation, we do, but with certain differences. What are the traditional? We include that with the science, and then we practice. So the report very, very strongly addresses, although that 2 degrees centigrade has been agreed to, but this trying to limit it to 1.5 degrees centigrade and continuously bargaining on the Paris Climate Agreement of 2015. So everything is not lost. My daughter sometimes say, oh, I don't see beyond 15 years. I said that, no, it's not that. You have to act. It's very sorry that we are really keeping a world that you have to struggle with. When we were born, when we had our childhood, it was not like that. It's really we are responsible. But everything is not lost. We can, and that is the path how we can do that, because we know that challenges are happening. You are still blessed that climate change is not happening in that big way, but where I live, in Kolkata, very close to Sundarban, we are already facing the brunts. In entire coastal areas, in Orissa, in Tamil Nadu, we are facing huge brunts of sea level rise. So next slide, please. So this is what IPCC has said, that we have already consumed. You know, when Industrial Revolution happened, when we were studying history, we thought, what a beautiful thing happened. Europe, science is developing, like every day something is happening. But what we did was we only looked at the economic development. And what we did is that we had consumed all the carbon budget that we have, that what we can spend really. So 1715 to 2019, we had already consumed 2,560 gigatons of carbon dioxide. Until 2100, we are left with only 500 gigatons of carbon dioxide. That is the budget we have, if we have to look at 1.5 degrees centigrade. And if we look at 2 degrees centigrade, which is really very, very vulnerable, will make many, many cities, countries, communities vulnerable, then also we have only 1350 gigatons. So this is the situation where we are in. That this is the report that has been endorsed by 195 countries all over the world, the IPCC report 6. So in this condition where we are standing, so the main focus is we have to increase our carbon sequestration and we have to decrease our greenhouse gas emissions simultaneously. And this would mean that we have deep socio-cultural, technological, economic, and political transformations, which I was talking about. The transformations is what we need. And what has the top emitters from Asia at COP26 already committed? China has committed for multilateralism, action for carbon dioxide peaking before 2030. We, India, our Prime Minister has committed for Panch Mantras, 4 measurable actions, including 50% energy sourced by renewables. Indonesia has focused on targets in forest and forest use sector, while Japan has committed to finance clean energy transition, and then Korea has said of phasing out coal and promote cooperation in forest restoration. So the countries are realizing that they alone cannot do. It has to be a conglomeration. It has to be a joint effort. Next. Reversing the trend of global warming, like our next generation always, can we really do it? Because we always felt that India ranks 103rd among per capita carbon dioxide production, but we are a huge country. If we combine all, we contribute as the 3rd largest greenhouse gas emissions. So we have to do something. We cannot just sit and say that, okay, those countries have done, but we are facing the brunt. We are, the low economic, the vulnerable people along the coasts, in the mountains, they are already facing it. So unfortunately, global warming will affect India more than the others because we are large, we are low income population. Next. So as IPCC has said that towards enhanced international regional cooperation, indispensable contribution of companies, which over the time this session, I missed this word that private players are very important. They have big money, multinational companies, and they are contributors to global warming. They are also having net zero targets, and they have huge funds. So private players, they want their business to be secured. Like I remember going in Bangkok in a conference in some 10, 12 years ago, Godrej was saying that we produce water and drinking water, and we want our water sources to be secured. Otherwise, our business will not run for 7 generations. I have inherited from my father. But if the water resources are not there, it will not happen. They're non-fund for nature. So it's an Europe-based organization. They were contributor to formation of Ramsar wetland in 1972. The Ramsar wetland the convention, and they are still part of that Ramsar wetland. They produce the Evian. Maybe many of you have gone to Europe and they this drinking water, that bottle Evian, it's all over the world. So they had gone for protecting the wetlands of international importance because they want their business to continue. If business has to continue, then the biodiversity and the natural resources has to be there. So it's very important that business needs also meet the biodiversity, and the biodiversity requirements also needs the business requirements. So this business and biodiversity has also to go together, and very important contribution of the companies are here we have to take care. And climate information, just like Dr. Das said, that is very, very important, and here we have the State Information Commissioner, so maybe a lot of things can come up in the future, and limiting future climate change. So I find that Paquet Declaration has absolutely set the context on all these, what has been done, and I find that, as CCF has said, that we do not want to go on a retrospective journey, which is very, very important. Now what we are all doing is reacting, responding, but you are going ahead. You are having a proactive, empathetic planning, I would say, to mitigate and adapt to climate change. So this is very important, and the Paquet Declaration, I went through all the details and I found it fascinating, and that I was just discussing whether it's on paper, on wish list, but it's really on now work. I can see from the deliberations that you have made. So next. So I will when I was looking at the Arunachal Pradesh, this population, you see we are at the crossroads, Arunachal Pradesh, with population rising from 1961 from 3.6 to now almost 15 lakhs, and it will have its consequences because we need to have a healthy society. We will have deforestation, we will have jhum cultivation because we need to grow, we would have big dams, we would have urbanization, we would have pollution, plastic, sewage, waste management, biodiversity loss. Population is increasing, our resources are limited, but these are going to happen. So what can we do? Next slide, please. So what I would like to stress on only one point, that is the carbon finance model. How to, because I saw for the first time in a Paquet Declaration the mention of the words carbon credits and all that. So I would like to leverage on this carbon finance model and how we have already done it. So there exists an example for you, and it is a case study from the Sundarban, India, because we, among very many factors that is irreversible of climate change is sea level rise. We cannot reverse it anymore. And we can restrict it with the temperature thing, but it is irreversible, and we are already facing that. So problem statements are we are having increasing number of storms, cyclones. I will just let you go through the coastal region a little bit, and to understand that you are so fortunate that you have not been facing till yet, but I'm blessed that I strongly pray that it doesn't happen here, but things are very, very bad, very, very bad. So this increasing tidal surges, land erosion, increasing insecurity in life and livelihoods. Next slide, please. So you see what has happened. This is the picture of the Sundarban. Here you have the mangrove forests, and here on this side is the villages. You see what has happened on the village side forest. People have cut it. They have made aquaculture, which gives only 2 to 3 years of profit, and then they go on cutting the forest. And what happened? You see what has happened, that the forest here exists, and on the village side they have just deforested everything. And this was happening. The last 22 years I'm working there in building coastal resilience in many states, not only West Bengal. So we were talking that you have to plant mangroves. You don't destroy mangroves. But nobody listened to us. But when in 2019 the Ayla cyclone happened, it just took everyone away. And from 2010, with this climate finance model, we could reforest. But how to reforest? So next slide, please. So this is the thing that happened. Everything was washed away. Everything. There was total migration. The women and the children were left behind with nothing. All the men had gone outside because nothing could be grown there. We lost one crop, watermelon. Still it is not growing. Previously, huge amount of watermelon used to come. Next slide. So what we did was to use the carbon finance model and have 3 benefits: the biodiversity benefit, the community benefits, and carbon offset strategy, because it's an upfront investment. For 20 years, so 15 to 20 years, the upfront investment goes. It goes for large-scale projects, the type of transformations that we see. Maybe we can go for 10 hectares, 20 hectares, 30 hectares, but when we go for 4,000, 2,000 hectares, then is the transformation that we can see. So it's a commitment over a long period of time. We partnered with Danone Fund for Nature because we have to be selective. There are a lot of, forays we call in the carbon market too. So you choose the partners very carefully. We got the land ownership from the government of West Bengal, letter of approval from the Ministry of Forest, Environment and Climate Change, Government of India, partnered with Botanical Survey of India, just like synergistic solutions, have everyone on the board. And then, next slide please. We went to restore mangroves, 4,500 hectares. 18,000 women were involved because they were there. Their men were all out. There was nothing to have subsistence for their living. So this project, they made nurseries, this plantation, monitoring, the science of mangrove restoration. So where do we plant? What is the site? What is the species? How is the monitoring to be documented? Everything was done by the people, like Sir was telling, community-based approaches, sir. Because all our NGOs are like this, small pockets. We can only do pilots. Government has huge outreach, but the penetration is with people. So community, government, NGOs, everyone has to work together. And carbon dioxide that was sequestered, this year we had 2021, we had 3rd time evaluation from the UNFCCC, and it was twice the amount that was expected to be sequestered, and it is registered with UNFCCC website because it's a carbon project. So what we did was an ecosystem management where we integrated science with the traditional knowledge. There are a lot of stories to tell. Nat Geo came last in October, November to cover everything of what has been done. Mike Pandey, so he was there for 5-6 days to cover the project. And so what we did was the traditional knowledge, and then we integrated science with it, because we have the science now. We have those researches, we have those instrumental data, etc. And then we had community governance, and then we had policy influences. We had Ministry of Government of India, we had Department of Land and Land Reforms, Government of West Bengal, and we worked. So this is that science, community, and policy interfaces where this ecosystem management could work. Next slide. So you see previously these were all blank. There is the Joint Director from Botanical Survey of India checking on the sites. It's not just you can plant anything everywhere. Forest peoples are there. So it needs site selection, species selection. Next. And now you can see that these areas which were all taken away, now they are all mangroves. So for last 10 years, all these has been done. And gradually, these are developing, and wherever these have developed, when EASH comes, every year now we are facing 2 cyclones of super cyclonic order. So where there are the mangroves, they are acting as the bioshield. So this is the nature-based solution. However, brick construction, concrete constructions, experts from Netherlands have come, but nothing could sustain, only the mangroves could sustain, and that is the nature-based solution we all are talking about. Next. So now this women, sir was saying that how women are very, very important sources of sustainability. Next slide. Huge nurseries, people, mobilization. Next slide. And all these monitored, mangrove manual produced with Department of Forest, news wrote it, but all in collaboration. Next. So next is like the synergistic solution. I always love to show this slide in the end because you see we have corporates, we have ecologists, we have multinationals, economists, the government looking at things, scientists, NGOs, and each one is having separate agenda. They are having investment. The economist is thinking of only poverty alleviation, biodiversity, business. Scientist is thinking only on climate change. NGOs, civil society participation, our voice needs to be there. But all these synergies have to be there. Like sir was telling, that it has to be a common togetherness that can achieve the milestones of climate change. Next. And how can we do that? So maybe this is the first step. Paquet Declaration has been made. We call it a dialogic change model, where we build partnerships. Here we are exploring, engaging. Then we find different containers. Already CCF sir has said that some federations, they are working. It has to be from below, with the communities. We build those containers where all these can be formalized. Then we implement and constant evaluation, and then sustain and expand the impact. So this is the dialogic change model. We propose to take this cooperation forward with multi-stakeholders because it's a very multi-sectoral area, and we have to have the proper recognition and inclusion of every stakeholders in this process. Next. And this is the 17 SDGs. We all talk about no poverty, 2, 3, 4, 5. We forget the 17 one, partnership for the goals. And without that partnership, we will not be able to fix that jigsaw puzzle, is what I wanted to say. And sir, any help to get on working with the carbon finance model? And it can be very, it can be something here, it can be something in Namdafa. My tryst with Arunachal started in 2000 when I was part of the Namdafa tiger census. So I spanned the area for 7 days, then went to Rowing, Anini, Mihao wildlife sanctuaries, then again came to Eagle Nest in 2010, and I'm so fortunate to again come and share my experiences with you on your historic journey. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ajanta De ma'am, for sharing the synergistic solutions in achieving climate goals, learning through case studies. Thank you, ma'am. As we move ahead, we come to the end of this first session. So to end this session, I would like to invite on stage Sri Gumjum Hadirji, Honorable State Information Commissioner, Arunachal Pradesh State Information Commission, for the vote of thanks. Please, sir.
Good afternoon once again. So we are winding up first part of our seminar on sustainable climate change and sustainable development, Arunachali perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, we have lunch ready for all of you. So have your lunch before our second session starts. So we are very, very thankful to Honorable Deputy Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh, who have spared this time to attend this very, very important climate change seminar as a chief guest. And we are very thankful to the Honorable Speaker of Arunachal Pradesh State Legislative Assembly, Sri Pasang Dorji Sona ji. And we are very, very thankful to our resource persons. We are very, very thankful to our state legislators, who have made it to today's seminars. We are very thankful to the media persons who are attentively recording the proceedings, and we hope to all you media people, the discussions, the deliverance that we have made today will be imparted and will be disseminated to all of you. Though the attendance was a little thin, but to inform you, many of the media persons are getting this live broadcasting from their own sources. And also the Honorable Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh, Mr. Pema Khandu, is also telecasting this program live through his social media network site, Facebook, and through other mediums. I hope the deliverance made by the Honorable Chief Guest of Honor, and our invited guest resource persons will benefit each one of you who have attended today's seminar. It is very, very important to discuss, since from 1992, when there was Earth Summit made in Brazil, the Rio de Janeiro, and to the Kyoto Protocol in Japan, to Paris Agreement, and to Climate Action Summit in United Nations, when the teen girl, Miss Greta Thunberg, challenged the world leaders, telling the world leaders that how dare you, destroying our ecology, our earth. So, with 197 countries attending the COP26 Glasgow, it is presumed that world over all the leaders are serious about the climate change. Everybody, all the leaders, all the countries, they want to protect this earth. So we in Arunachal Pradesh, we in India, through the Honorable Prime Minister of India, Sri Narendra Modi ji, and also the packet declaration made by Arunachal government, the futuristic Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh, Mr. Pema Khandu ji, the very, very active Honorable Deputy Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh, and their team has committed to bring the carbon emission of Arunachal Pradesh to neutral or to bring it to negative. So we will also make our journeys forward. We are already boarded the climate discussion trains, and we will deliver with the deliverance of Honorable Deputy Chief Minister and our Chief CCF. Arunachal is very, very positive on climate change. All of you will be benefited out of this, and we will carry forward these activities. Please join us for lunch, and we have a second session, that is panel discussion. And in the evening, late evening, we have a cultural program. All of you, free of cost, टेंशन फ्री रहने के लिए सबको. तो प्लीज join us for lunch now. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, Gumjum sir, for the vote of thanks. May I please request all our esteemed guests and resource persons on the stage for the photo session. Please, sir. And we'll start our second session at 3:30 p.m. after lunch, where we'll have an in-depth discussion, panel discussion on climate change, impact on the socio-ecological condition of Arunachal Pradesh.